Lizaman had a strange vision that changed his life completely. Although the young man did not immediately understand step the boy was referring to, the man explained that for some, that step would mean nothing, but for others it could make them fall off a cliff. So it was necessary to remember that a word was enough to stop a person on the edge of the abyss. Looking at our reflection, the hero tried to convince him that he was not a coward. Hearing these words, the young man's eyes filled with tears. Stunned by this, Lisa and Min did not know how to respond to such a comment, but understood that things would never be the same again. Since the Greeks began to appear in the world, people had divided into assailants and all others. A little nervous, the young man went to the office of the looters at Corporal in the hope of finding something. For a while, one of the administrators that was behind the counter, "I need our grandfather to enter the office." Lisa and Min, squeezing their hands in fear, said in a low voice that he understood everything, although it did not actually have no idea what to expect. By shyly entering the office, the young man knew that in order to become a mugger, pass an aptitude test, and that only those who woke up with an aura above a certain level were entitled to become full members. Right, in an indifferent tone, the employee said it was not her first visit, so I would not waste my time explaining how the test worked. Then the girl replied if he was aware that in 1 year he would have to enlist in the army, adding that he had been using the raider as an excuse. That trick would no longer work. With the same indifferent tone, the girl continued, saying that he knew of Lee Semon's situation, but that I could not go on like this forever. Then asked if he wanted me to write to him a referral to a psychologist to hear that the young man had said that the employee would be tested, reiterated that it could not get rid of it next year. Sitting in a room, the young man did not want to think about any, felt extremely depressed and anxious. Only a few minutes passed and the young woman noted that the test subject score, as in the previous year, it was 103. Everyone knows that the values of Laura from all awake individuals start at the same level and then slowly increase, but the young man's value had not changed. Since he knew he was awake, Lee Semon thought sadly that he had been training hard all this time, but then he realized that he simply did not have the talent to become a robber. The reason was that its aura value had not changed, which meant that it had not progressed, so there was no point in continuing. At that time, the girl gave the customer a document and asked him to sign it at the bottom, adding that all the tests had already been completed. The young man fell back into his own thought about how he had once truly believed that he would succeed in your objective. Our boy thanked aloud for giving him the opportunity to take the test again, although he was thinking about how reality had given him a slapped. In the evening when she returned home, the boy carefully opened the front door. The interior was dirty, but it seemed that our grandfather did not bother him at all because he was lost in his own thoughts. When turning on the computer, Reed Semon said in voice high that today was the perfect day to play, but then he was paralyzed by the surprise. A notification appeared on the screen indicating that had been verified the young person's right to participate, although he did not understand what that meant. After entering the Transcendental Network, the young man saw a list of participants and a list of special participants in front of him, although I did not quite understand where this site came from. Realizing that he had to find out everything, Lisa and Min clicked. Immediately on the participant board, computer showed a complete list of different people with a great deal of skills, although the young man still did not understand what it meant. All that and how the list could help him. With a smile, our grandfather thought that he had probably other fools 8th grade syndrome. After reading the story of a certain dumb one gentleman, the young man said he was safe, that the words of a wise man would help him and bring him back to the real world. The boy was reading something enthusiastically on the page web when he suddenly read on the sound of the necks of someone's parents breaking, after which he began to laugh. The young man wrote that enough was enough, living together as parasites at the expense of others, and following a recommendation, decided to go out for a breather, thinking that behind his words, the man reflected seriously about his life and gave a blow to the table. The young man was angry to learn that Han Sung-jun had reached platinum status, despite the fact that they used to be seen face to face every day, and this unpleasant individual had mocked our grandfather, but now it no longer mattered because his torturer had already reached platinum status. While the young man was still sitting in his small apartment in front of their computer screen, Lisa and Min approached the board and one of the stickers. Tear it off. Holding the piece of paper in his hands, he said angrily in his voice that all this made him angry and annoyed. A moment later he pressed the small piece of paper in his fist and shouted in voice high that he was angry with everything that was happening around him. Recovering a little composure, the young man decided to reopen the page web to read something new. Our grandfather said out loud that he was a loser who had dropped out of school to become a writer, and that he was now a keyboard warrior, a sofa critic, that he had not been able to pass the qualifying test. And again the young man saw a message on the screen stating that his right to participate had been verified. With a mask, mocking and angry, the irritated boy said he did not understand why the site had reopened web and wished that the omniscient Kim Bong act out polite. After that, his friend sent him a series of messages. This did not calm the young man at all. On the contrary, laughed and said that some madman was writing to him. The young man was so used to computers and online discussions that he did not care about. In no way the opposite. Shouted that he was not afraid of nothing and that he wanted that person to find him. Not knowing what was going on behind his back, says Min repeatedly stated that if this crossed paths with him and would undoubtedly take care of him. However, at that time, something happened that the boy did not expect at all. A voice behind him asked him what he would do if they found each other. The girl who had appeared out of nowhere looked. The The young man but did not dare to say anything, then asked department owner if he was really unemployed. Without knowing what to say, the boy grunted without understanding what was happening to him and where it had come from. That strange stranger in her house. A moment after R realized that a portal had appeared, Snow White, in front of him, and at that time the girl was no longer standing in front of him but floating, yet he descended easily to the ground to be closer to the young man. The unknown said he was curious to see what the young man looked like and added that everything turned out to be different from what she had expected. A minute later the blonde remained silent, apparently observing attentively the boy's reaction and waiting. Something about him, however, he in turn watched everything that happened as if trying to automatically cover eyes with hands before everything I saw in front of him. But what happened a moment later surprised Liz Emin even more, since smiles enveloped his whole body. The girl felt as safe as possible. So I understand the boy, why he was screaming and why he behaved so inappropriately. The boy, who was now tied everywhere, could not move or speak, and realized that he was completely defenseless in front of the blonde. Within his voice, Beauty said he was a real weakling. The girl remained firm in her posture, stating that the boy was not even good enough to be an insect, and among other things, that he had no idea how he had entered the network. Transcendental. The next minute, blonde lifted our ass to the roof, addressing him as if he were an unknown man, and asked him who was really scared. He thought that if they let him go, I would gladly tell them who I was. That in its current state it could not do so. Undoing their shackles, the hero continued to observe the young man, who did not like him very much. Freed from his supposed captivity, the young man fell to the ground with a roar and started murmuring something unpleasant between his teeth, answering the boy's questions. Beauty said her name was Iana. After that the beauty smiled and pointed out that the young man was a true liar, without understanding why I was telling everyone I was a looter. Embarrassed, the young man began to justify himself, explaining that it was true, but that he was actually a magician, not a full-fledged looter, that our grandfather was not lying, explained that in this world there are people, current and assailants with aura, and that they are the ones who usually hunt flies, and he is an awakened man with aura. A moment later Iana asked the boy to demonstrate his aura to make sure he was not lying. Lee Semin was nervous, his whole body was trembling, but in spite of this, found the strength to show what he was capable of. The girl observed attentively and responded with a mocking tone in his voice, if that was all the boy was capable of doing. As he tried to understand what he meant, Blonde covered her face with her desperate hands. After a brief pause, Beautiful smiled, whether it was true or just a joke, although she herself favored the second option. Upon realizing that he read sign, did not understand something, the guest began to gather mana around him to show the man of what he was capable of. This had a strong effect on our hearts, that I could not believe what the beautiful woman was seeing. Was surrounded by an irresistible and unparalleled power that attracted people to it. At that time Lizzie Min decided for himself that the transcendent were boys. Cornered and crying, the young man begged his new not to touch him, nor will it kill him. At that moment a voice was heard from the hallway. Someone would talk about an earthquake and ask him how it was, to which he shouted that he was fine. Covering her face with her hand again, and Anna began to scold herself for wasting points he had accumulated with so much effort because of the loser in front of him. In anger, began painting about how the boy had managed to get on the net. Transcendental. Although he calmly explained that he had simply turned on his computer, the beauty had never seen anything like it, so she thought to herself that it seemed too strange. Although he realized that he was probably, it was about 1/2 of communication in their world. The boy wanted to know much more. The young man told him shyly that I did not know what else I could tell him. The girl was not going to give up, so he began to ask her what else I could tell her, but only about him. Raising hand, the young man assured his known that there was nothing interesting in her life, that had simply happened because of many problems, and I had ended up here after finding a more or less clean place for her. Diana pointed out the fact that our boy had reached the point of converting his own life and his own home in a pigsty. Lisa Iman heard the blonde call her a pathetic person and said out loud that he knew it very well. The girl did not want to humiliate him, so he commented that he probably was trying to change something in his life. The blonde really wanted to believe it, so she went back to ask him the question with determination in his voice. The boy sat there not knowing what to say, and no matter how cruel the words were, did not hurt at all. On the contrary, the boy started talking about how he got orphaned at a young age and was adopted by his current parents. He continued, saying that he realized he was gay in school, but that due to harassment was never able to finish his studies. After a brief pause, recalled how he ended up in front of a laptop computer where he sat playing for days and days. Finally, it was Liz Simmons' turn to talk about her aura readings that had not changed in 6 years. Feeling a little sad, the blonde said it was the saddest story I had never heard before, and that to hear this her grandmother agreed with her. Suddenly, Yana proudly announced that it was time to leave. However, before leaving, the guest told her to remember that if he wrote unpleasant things again, she would go to kill him, but before that, he had to write it. Upon returning to the portal, Blonde stopped for a moment because she remembered something. With tears in his voice, added that the world is very diverse, cruel and unfair, as many people know. Despite this, young people have to go out and start doing something, and as human beings are, must live, not just exist. Stuttering Lisa Emin came out in fear if they could see each other again. Laughing, the blonde said that absolutely everything was possible, but only if the young man could transcend. Rising from the ground, the young man thought that he simply had to face his own fears head on, with a small ornament in his hands. The boy wondered if he he would ever be able to become the assailant he had always seen in his dreams. Realizing that he had to move forward, the young man returned first to his laptop and wrote in. For the first time all night, Lisa and Min did something that made him feel good about himself. Boy wrote that he was a young man, unemployed person who leaned before all his brothers and sisters in a network. Transcendental. It must be said that since then this network has become a part of our grandfather's life. Seeing the photos of Kayan, the boily exclaimed that it was great since this young man had not shown anything for quite some time. Everyone knew the dark lion Kayan. Many liked him and many admired him. This man was born within a family of a nobleman and a slave girl. After his mother was killed by an aristocrat, the boy playing their skills with the sword to become a mercenary, then ted all the aristocrats and became into the most powerful master on the continent. Seeing a photo of the young man and his wife, our grandfather decided that these people, somehow like the young man, reflected on what a family photo was, despite the fact that he himself stopped calling to their parent. When the system sent you a notification, was a message from a man whom everyone called Fergan the Ghost Sword. Lisa and Min, I knew very well that it was one of the best swordsmen he admired. Our grandfather thought for himself, this man was like a brother, greater for him, and therefore it was very easy and comfortable for him communicate with him. Sitting in front of his computer, the boy said aloud that for some reason lately his side was a little sore and he did not understand what could be the cause. At that time Lisa and Min advised the generous swordsman that it would be best to start with an emotional message and ask the girl where her wings were. It could also be said that the young man mistook the beauty for a mirror, which should also be pleasant for her, and when the beautiful smiles, can simply say that his smile makes your heart can much faster. At the end the guy added that you can't stop there, you have to move forward until she finally reciprocates you. The grateful young man spoke enthusiastically to the young man, saying that as soon as he gathered the number of points required, I would definitely visit. The boy was glad to hear this, but did not fully understand what the word meant. Visit. It might be that someone would come to see him again. Redis E. Min told himself that in its interactions with the transcendental, I had noticed a characteristic feature, that it was diligence. Never postponed what they had to do. For some reason, these people always kept their promises, were not looking for excuses, and did not shirk their responsibilities. Sitting in a chair, the young man frowned at the teacher and highlights the fact that compared to them, he was nothing more than a slacker, current with a lot of free time, and looking at his own hands. The young man decided that, however, had to face the truth. Bowing the head, the young man said in low voice that he could not become a mugger and that it was time to leave. By opening the fridge or microwave, found a bottle of alcohol and decided it was the best time to drink something strong. Lysemin did not intend to serve the drink in a glass, wanted to drown his sorrows, so he started drinking straight from the bottle, and quite fast. Lying on the bed, the boy began to talk with himself again about his life and everything that had happened to him before. The young man, without addressing anyone in particular, dies. Why he had to give off an aura, if it was good for nothing all his life, had thought that someday it would make an excellent robber, and I had never seen another way. Road to your goal. The Argentine wanted to achieve his goal at any cost, and so to speak, to demonstrate himself who had not made a mistake in his choice. The boy was hurt and angry, but wanted to prove it to all that he was not the loser they had always been, believed someone they could make fun of. Despite this, had stagnated at 103, and that value had not changed in a long time. What it meant, that it had not progressed in its development. As he continued his efforts, Reed Min complained that not even could get out of bed easily and quickly, finding the strength to do the almost impossible. The young man reopened his laptop and entered its usual website. In a moment, there was already an argument in the forum about how the boy was unemployed and wanted to change. However, instead of getting up and doing something, the young man took the bottle again and took a few sips. I just wanted to click on the button to send your message, and that all the assailants would listen to him. After that, the young man lay down on the table, but it was not clear if I was going to sleep or he had simply crawled to think of some. Time passed, but nothing changed since it read Semen. I was still lying on the table and doing the same. A few hours later, the young man got up with a jump and began to scold himself for having stayed asleep, although it was not his intention. Staring at the screen, reprimanded himself publishing something while I was drunk that he had not even intended to publish. The mouse and started looking for his last messages to verify what he had written, since I did not remember it when I was sober. Staring at our screen, sat in silence for a while. To the young man's surprise, there were many comments below his publication about how short life is, and that at least you have to go out into the street to start something. Lisa and Min, I did not expect things to turn out this way, so he went back to reading the messages over and over again, thinking about what to do next. The boy began to thank everyone for their advice, without realizing that he was no longer only in the room. That time an unknown voice behind him asked him if R was the unemployed boy. The young man, who had already gone through something similar once, did not want to face it for the second time, so he did not dare turn around and face the truth. The young man also thought that this time the voice was so high-pitched that sounded like sharp metal. Lee Semen realized that it was probably a matter of one of the transcendental, but it was not clear to him why he had approached him. Perhaps boy would never have decided to turn around, but Yellow had to cross his back, what made our grandfather jumping hard. In the meantime, the man continued to evaluate the young man, saying that he was helpless, depressed, with a weak and fragile that corrodes him, the mind and body in tears. Boy could not understand what was happening to him, clearly understood which was as if a large number of snakes bit him. The body at the same time the voice, addressing Lizaman, proudly stated that he should not even think about taking a chance. Our mirror turned to the mirror and was about to say something but could not. The young man wanted to strike with a clenched fist, but he was in such a state that he could not do so. At the same time, the hero stated that it turned out that the boy had not completely surrendered. Our chest remained motionless, but the unwanted guest repeated his name over and over again, as if I wanted to say something extremely important. Suddenly the young man found himself in a very strange place, realized that there was water underneath. For some reason it did not fall. Looking around, the young man tried to order his thoughts and understand where I was, and what could it be. The boy explained that he was the best hunter, transcendent of all times, added that he reads if Min did not appear to be a weakling, although Lee had an opinion completely different from itself. The young man, surprised, heard that he was being qualified, repeatedly strong personality, but it turned out that he himself could not believe it. After a moment the young man finally smiled, looking like, understand the meaning of all these words. The man continued, explaining that the world was ruled by certain laws and considered Ian to be very strong, that the power of this transcendent being was beyond comprehension, therefore stated that the young man should accumulate points in order to access the track board where someone could leave you a Lizaman message. Extended his hand and shouted something, realizing that he did not understand at all the meaning of all those words and therefore wanted clarification. The young man asked again and again to stop, but at that very moment fell to the floor of his apartment. Upon rising, it seemed to him that it had all been just a nightmare because he had fallen asleep. The next moment, our grandfather noticed a scratch on his arm and touched himself. Lee Semin clenched his fist and noticed that it hurt very much and he found it unpleasant. At that very moment, like lightning falling from the sky, our hearts recalled that it was considered weak and imagined himself as such. For several minutes the young man stayed there, not knowing what to do or where to go. It turned out that he could not believe that all that would have really happened. Looking forward, the young man thought about how, for some reason, suddenly he felt lighter than ever. Looking his apartment, the young man decided it was the best time to tidy up a bit. After a while, grabbing his bag, the boy was glad to have done everything he could, and having completed the cleaning, Lisa and Min were in no hurry to go anywhere, so he raised hands and looked as if I had never seen them before. With a touch of in his voice, the young man thought that only there was a piece of paradise left in this apartment, insinuating his presence and his own. Taking a look at his blackboard, the young man decided that it should always remember his encounter with the transcendental. While fastening his tracksuit jacket, the young man decided that these words were extremely important, so I should always have them in mind. Shortly thereafter, our grandfather was standing in front of the door, about to be opened. Open it, the young man said to himself who did not consider himself weak but a person who did a lot of things. On returning home, first thing he did was to jump into the food, chewing it with so much energy as if I had not eaten in several weeks. Looking at the empty chicken box, the boy thought to could not believe I was so hungry myself. After running 10 minutes, began to scold himself for this behavior, inappropriately deciding that he should not act in this way. Lisa and Min decided to pull each other together, but instead he limited himself to eating his fill because he said to himself that he had to go for a run again. It was a difficult test that the young man found difficult to overcome, as it relied on buildings instead of running. Thought to himself that it would be difficult for him alone, and I had always been aware of it. It had not been long before Lisa and Min was already close to the mirror, of which I had read in an advertisement recently. Opened the door shyly, ticked and asked if he had someone inside and if facilities were open. The boy's face suddenly changed when he saw something completely unusual in front of him. There was a strong man who lifted up easily a scary bar with weights. Just looking at it, our grandfather realized this and understood that in order to achieve such a result, it was necessary to train hard and diligently. Man did not respond to this, limiting himself to saying that he had never seen the young man in paradise. By not receiving a response, the hero asked him if he had come to train and get in shape. Immediately told the young man that I was very happy to meet him. Told him his name was Kim Dogbai. After listening to our rejection to submit in response, the man said he had understood immediately why the young man had come, because I had smelled some. Looking Liz Seed in the eye, the coach replied how long it had been since I had eaten chicken, then continued, saying that the young man had decided to start exercising today, had done some exercises, and had decided to reward himself with the chicken he had ordered, adding that he did not like this approach. Taking our reflection hand in hand, the man said that the young man needed to warm up first, and then raising his voice, said that since he had come all the way there, I had to start that same day. Kim Dog Bay looked closely at the young man's reaction, as if he wanted me to understand the real thing, meaning of his words. Taking the young man's hand again, the man said he was sure that the young man practiced sports before. Upon hearing a mysterious answer, cheering on Liz Semin, the coach went on to point out that the young man had the fundamentals, and all he needed to do was work hard on his physique. Only a few minutes had passed, and our grandfather was already running on the tape, and judging by its appearance, was a real challenge for him. In response to the coach coach's question. The young man said he was tired, and that it was time to take a break, but instead, the man yelled at the young man to fall, then stand up, then fell again, and what is more, I had to learn this once and for all. Lee admitted that I did not expect this sweaty and exhausted approach. Tried to say something, but had no strength. As he kept running, the young man thought in how I could no longer go around in circles, in how he had lost his aura and pride, leaving him with nothing. The trainer could not read the mind, but saw the young man's efforts, so he told him to move on, adding that if the young man, I felt I was on the verge of an untimely death, should go ahead. After training, Lee me said in the voice, "Hi," that I felt I was about to die there because I could not move anything. Kim Dogbai did not care about that, just smiled and said he would wait for the young man. The next day in the same room, and looking at our reflection, the man said in a low voice that he was a great guy, and most importantly, he was not lazy and did not give up. However, the boy who had not yet left listened to these kind words and thanked. I need the man for his support. Our grandfather thought for himself, same as at that time, when he felt the long taste and desire for something in the evening, sitting in front of his computer. Boy wrote that today, for the first time in his life, had given the first and most important real step in his life. That moment, Rita C and Min remembered something the best demon hunter had told him, and going to the corresponding section, noted that he had to go to the track where I would find something interesting for him. When you clicked on the saw that he was being denied access because I did not yet have enough points. Our grandfather was to read this, wanted to familiarize himself track as soon as possible, but he did not know how to get the points he was missing. At that time, the system sent you a mission which said that the young man had to lose weight to 100 kilograms or less. Seeing this, the young man shouted because I could not believe what they saw, his eyes, and did not understand how he could lose weight to that level, and possibly even less. So the young man decided to move forward without caring about anything and continue towards his goal without giving up his dream. The next day, while running on the tape, our grandfather thought he would definitely lose weight regardless of how much effort and time it will take. The coach too saw the young man's determination, so he kept encouraging him not to stop and keep running even if he felt he was tired. After a while, Lee Semin stopped. Look at something interesting that catches your attention. Looking at his smile, the young man decided that in that short time had managed to lose some weight, or at least that is what it looked like. Encouraged by his charisma, the young man raised his hand, moves himself in voice high, and said he would get it because he needed to move forward. The young man knew exactly what he wanted, so his training continued, not only in paradise but also in their daily lives. The boys running around heard the young man speak aloud on their plans for interval training. A girl who had met our grandfather previously was surprised to notice that he was running again. Called that when he met Lee Semin seemed rude, but now it had changed a lot, and that was true because our grandfather had demonstrated a willpower that neither he himself had suspected. Despite the fact bars horizontals were difficult for him, I was not going to give up this idea since it was given that it was the only way to develop mass muscle. Over and over again our chest repeated aloud that he would not get any stronger until he started working on himself. Boy recalled an interesting encounter, transcendentalist, and told himself that he was neither a coward nor a weakling. Each new movement was a challenge for himself, who not only had to accept but also to overcome with dignity. The stranger heard the young man repeating to himself that he would fight to the end even if he died, and liked those words because they revealed their best qualities. Suddenly, when the beauty approached, it was clear that he wanted to say something. Finally, the young woman addressed the young man, congratulated him, and pointed out that he always trained hard. A moment later, added that he had noticed the young man from its first day, and that I could now say with certainty there were very few people with such ambitious targets. Lisa and Min was in no hurry to reveal all the details, so he just said it was time to go. The beauty looked at our reflection with a burning gaze, thinking for themselves, saying that I should not have spoken to him at all. Boy thought for himself that this girl was most likely a mugger, as I could feel his blue mark, or at least that is what it looked like to him. Physical abilities of the assailants far exceed those of ordinary people. Even if we talk about low-ranking assailants, we also the enormous rewards they received for risking their lives created a sense of privilege. The young man knew it firsthand, so I had an idea about those things. Called how he once the most veterans saw him and shouted at him to go home because I would never achieve anything more than a blue mark. Everyone knows that even among the assailants there is an insurmountable wall. Therefore, everyone understands how different who are the assailants of ordinary people who has no skills. Lee Semin made an effort with all his might, but at that time his new known to have reached him told him he was going to overtake him. A moment later, the beautiful maliciously hidden the young man and looked at him with a certain indifference, and to hurt the young man even more, I wish him luck. But he added that even that would not help him. After a while, Boy returned home, realizing that his training was probably over. As our grandfather approached the computer, was curious to know who had published algo en internet. A moment later, saw a message from Iana. The young man thought to himself that at first this girl had found her extremely scary, but over time he realized it was sweet and even turquoise. The most interesting thing was that she was on a level completely different. Being so, the boy decided that his main task now was to concentrate on the mission, especially because at that time the system sent a notification that a new task I was waiting for our grandfather grandfather. But before that he had to weigh himself, something that he was very afraid of and because of which prayed with all his might that it would not happen. At that time, the system sent another message, saying that the young man weighed 100 kilograms and 2G. Standing in the same place, boy began to lament that he was missing them. 2G to complete the mission I had learned, which bothered him a lot. The young man was angry and shouting because I had no idea how to solve this problem, although I knew for sure that I had to solve it. But 1 minute later the system showed a new message indicating that the weight of our thickness was 100,000.05 kilograms. Lysaman had a new idea. Simply get rid of the water. The result was immediate. The computer wrote a notification indicating that the participant would receive 100 points in the Transcendental Network as a reward. The computer suggested to the young man to redeem your points for a level improvement, to which he agreed. 1 minute later the system sent a large number of tracks that could help you move forward. Our grandfather. I was so confused that I did not know what to lend myself to. Attention, there was also good news. In honor of his first visit to the forum, the young man had the opportunity to read a free publication. Was an article dedicated to Liz Semin, written by the best demon hunter of all times. The young man realized that he had to read it, so he did. Click on the corresponding button and wait for an answer. The screen said that art to perfect human abilities begins with Dantian and ends with the celestial circle of the whole body. However, those who are subject to asphyxiation cannot complete the celestial circle. The reason is that their inner energies cannot circulate adequately and dissipate as the smoke continued to, saying that if the young man mastered the right techniques and returned to the cycle, would be able to leave that state. The major demon hunter of all times transmitted to the young man the divine art that he himself had created. The young man followed all the instructions specified in the corresponding document. Suddenly our reflection thought about how he had always seen aura as a tool of control and power. Tears in the eyes continued to reflect on the fact that the major demon hunter of all times treated the aura as something alive. That was the main answer. With his arms crossed, the young man continued to reflecting about the fact that great mercy is very difficult. Sitting on a bench, read if Min was immersed in his own thoughts, realizing that now he had to think otherwise and that this was the key to everything. Raising his head, the young man told himself that he would be willing to repeat this decision hundreds of times. I knew that I could change it and turn it into someone complete different by focusing on energy. The young man spread it all over his body and it began to act more strongly. With every minute that passed, understood that he had to concentrate and imagine the process as if it were threading a needle. The greatest demon hunter of all time said that the aura flows through the body like water, spreading everywhere like roots, was necessary. Following this not so much mentally as feeling, and believe that the young man was really true. I knew I had to concentrate on the obstacles that your aura tried to go through. After that, all obstacles had to be overcome with a single powerful movement. With every passing moment, the young man became more and more concentrated, realizing that this time I had to do something almost impossible. A few minutes later, I was staring, his hands surrounded by green energy, jumping out of his seat. The young man, full of joy, finally shouted his victory. Had achieved it, had achieved what he had set out to do. Full of joy, the young man fell backwards but did not care, lying there and smiling. Remembered how difficult everything had been for him. Kept going anyway. Raising your hand, Lee Sem said confidently that he could become much stronger. I knew it for sure. A few days later, the young man decided to register for a private to train robbers. I knew that the strongest people were trained there. Subsequently, gained even more confidence in their own abilities and were capable of performing various. One of the students informed Professor that someone had come to see him, and the young man's expression revealed a certain confusion. Upon leaving the room, the coach reflected on what he had achieved, as he did not expect to meet anyone. Our grandfather addressed the master, Mr. Won Jong-hoon, telling him that it had been a long time since they had been seen, and expressing his joy at the meeting. Coach shouted in surprise when he realized it was Lisa and Min who was in front of him, who, although he had not become a mugger, had managed to change. Hugging the young man, told him that he could now call him brother and offered him a drink, although Leisman immediately pointed out that he had come for another reason. Raising our hand, began to demonstrate his aura, showing that it had become completely different. Jung-hoon was paralyzed without believing what they saw. His eyes were something incredible. The young man looked at Coach and asked him to show him its aura again from a different angle. That time, the teacher turned to the boys. They had to continue their training, and he himself, briefly absent to attend to his business. A few minutes later, Won Jong-hun invited the boy to enter the room to check the changes in its aura at the beginning. The young man did not communicate much, but I was curious to know the result. Suddenly the young man heard Ringer's voice, who suggested that you take a look at the result. By viewing the number, Lee Si-min was literally stunned, could not believe what his eyes saw, because the scoreboard showed 1034. At that time, I heard his name and the congratulations of the master, who told him that he finally had left behind his curse-seated. Lee Semin thought for himself that he had only been practicing the technique for 1 month, and that the value of his aura had increased almost 15 times. When the trainer asked him how this could have happened, the young man, who had followed by several effective give recommendations, crossing his arms over his shoulder, commented that it was a great achievement and that it was now possible to understand who was capable of what. In the lobby, told the boys that he used to like her, give up and wanted someone to teach him a lesson. Smiling, Won Jong-hun confidently said that the young man would be able to defeat anyone who became his opponent. Our grandfather was scared, but willing to accept the challenge, squeezing his fists and doing everything he could. A few minutes later, the opponents were already in the ring, and spectators gathered at both sides to see this and in performance. The red-haired athlete watching what was happening was surprised if I really had to challenge this to a duel, and asked him how much aura he had. On hearing that it was slightly more than 1,000, the young man stopped for a moment, decided that the bet would be more than 1,000 points, and thought that Won Jong-un had probably trained this man before, understood that it would be rude to start fighting just like that, so he introduced himself as I did Jintz, and his opponent heard his name. Our boy knew that a fight was coming, an armed melee, and was willing to give his all, extended his hand. I knew the battle was about to begin, and his opponent was ready, decided that he could destroy this guy with very little energy, thanks to its aura. However, the fight did not start as Yujin had expected. His opponent had already intercepted his blows. Realizing that he would not give up so easily, in an instant, the young man realized best was to attack and began to search for actively weak points and carrying out its plan. A moment later, Lisa Emin hit the redhead boy hard. It was clear that the young man felt safe, wanted to prove to his coach that he was not weak, and that he was not one of those who gave up so easily. A moment later, Yujin was asked his opponent how he felt and whether he was wounded, then congratulated him, telling him that he really dominated basics and that this was already good. The young man's movements showed who still wanted teach him a lesson and that he would act as he sees fit. Convenient. While beating, the young man replied to Lisa and Min, when I would start fighting in earnest, because its blows, they still looked like childish and clumsy movement. 1 minute later, our corpse lay at the other end of the ring, and it was clear that his opponent had done something powerful. The young man observed his opponent and realized it was not that simple, and that the fight would continue to the end of the second. Next, the young man pounced on his opponent, deciding that the time had come to put an end to the fight. Lysaman did not even think of giving up, and quickly rose from his place, attacking the redhead boy. All present observed how he skillfully confronted his experienced opponent, wondering where he had learned the techniques of jiu-jitsu. After all is good, I thought the assailant, do not have time to study martial art by fighting monsters. See no point in learning fighting and pain techniques. Fight continued and Yuin was still going on, wondering where that boy had learned so much. The young man did not appear weak and threw punches, aware that he had to look strong and skilled at a given time. The assailant began to swing his legs, but it was evident from his head that he would not even approach. To our grandfather, the crowd immediately began to laugh, saying that his blows were only air and that he was impotent in this fight. Yujin was embarrassed because he understood that he was being mocked, despite the fact that in reality was much stronger than everyone thought. At one point, the young man realized that he had to prove himself and to all the others that he was capable of the almost impossible. Anger and determination were evident in the eyes of the young man, who wanted to strike as strongly and quickly as possible. His opponent got as close as possible to Lisa and Min, and even hit him. At that moment, our hero began to gather his mana until it became clear whether would strike back or defend itself. In the following second, struck his opponent's chin, and it was clear that it was not easy for him. Lysaman knew he could not stop and continued to act. 1 second later, Eugenesi was already lying on the ground. Without understanding what had happened, our grandfather left his foot in such a way that his opponent could not get up and fight back. The young man does not performed and developed several more powerful techniques. The redhead beat him angrily how he dared to do something like this. Raising the hand, the young man gathered all his mana to counterattack and prove who was in charge. His opponent was outraged because he could not be humiliated, but broke the rules, surprising everyone. Coach saw that something was wrong, turned to his protege and headed for the ring to stop fight. A moment later, Won Jong began to separate the boys, realizing that the fight was over. Shortly thereafter, our grandfather was already running down the street. This became one of his favorite activities. After starting training, the boy kept repeating himself who had to be happy. To recompose and control their emotions, understood that his opponent was not trained and was acting incorrectly, and that he simply lacked motivation. I did not understand why all this was necessary. Lee Semon's victory in combat was the result of his diligent daily training. That even his coach noticed the young man reflected on the fact that the force had always been inside him, had simply been accumulating, so it was not surprising who was able to defeat his opponent. When they entered the gym where he trained our grandfather, several boys took a close look at it and noticed that the strong man had been able to change in just 3 months. What seemed incredible, however, the young man, I knew that the 3 months of training had been exhausting and that he had had to work hard to achieve his goals while training. The young man felt the warmth, but it did not bother him. Leisman was proud of himself and was head in front of the boys, who looked at him with surprise. A moment later, boy addressed our playing as yet the same, since they were practically the same age. After a brief pause, one of the boys asked the young man if it had really taken him only 3 months change, so he added, someone else has made it, then he himself could become like ours. Literally addressing these guys, the young man said with thought they had the wrong person, although they still did not understand the essence of the matter. That moment, Aoyu's voice demanded that they show respect for their mentor. enter. Kim Dog-bae looked intently at the young people, greeted them and told them he was glad to see them. The man showed up and explained that he was a trainer. 1 minute later, suggested that the kids discuss everything in his office. Lisa and Min watched the door close and heard the newly arrived to wait with horror for what was to come. After a while, the coach playing with the boys and said they wanted to be like ours, fight and achieve better results. Explained that they had to follow the same training program as the young man had been following for 3 months. The trainer explained that it had signed a contract that obligated children to attend the championship in certain schedules, which was a great advantage for everyone. Smiling, Lee Semin, I wished them luck and pointed out that it would be interesting too, although not entirely easy. After finishing his training, the young man went to the site web to see if there were new publications. Standing in the middle of the mirror, thought, and how long? I had just started visiting this website. That time, I closely watched the trainer, finding incredible what was happening. Suddenly one of the guys said it was his first day of training and that he felt he was about to fall. That time, the young people observed one of the apprentices. That seemed strange. The boys noticed that or around you. They did not understand what he was doing to her. Decided that he was most likely a horseman because only they possessed such unique abilities. That time, the young man was exposed by his older partner. Although he did not understand what he was talking about, limited himself to staying there, observing and creating memorize all the movements of what was happening. Standing in the mirror, read see me, thought about how people had been looking strangely lately. This was especially true in the case of the newly arrivals who had recently joined the Congress. The boy felt uncomfortable with all the attention he received. There was nothing I could do about it. Looking at the kids, thought to himself that he did not know what plans plotting those. That moment one of them approached Lee Semin and politely replied. The young man said he felt something unusual while watching Lia Si Min, which discouraged him as much as possible. Started talking about who our grandfather was, although he himself did not understand the full meaning of what was happening. Lia Si Min did not understand any since the spoke incoherently and inconsistently. A moment later, came even closer and stated that Lee Si Min was a mugger. The young man decided to play along with, thinking there was no need to be afraid and that everything was not as scary as it seemed. Turned out that he was not yet a full-fledged assailant, but he was going to take the exam in a month. The man in the glasses expressed envy to those who were going to take the exam, as he himself aspired to become a mugger. The young man looked at him with surprise, believing what he was saying. A moment later, the young man began to his manna, explaining that he was also a robber, but had not yet developed his skills. Lisa and Min did not understand why the did not go to the for assailant, but he explained that his parents considered this circumstance to be dangerous for what I was waiting for. Until reaching the age of majority, the young man decided to focus on their studies and strengthen your physical strength. At that time, thought that many assailants reveal their skills late and that it is needed time and effort to become a real professional. The young man reiterated that he was destined to become a writer. Lisa and Min did not understand such enthusiasm, but the man in the glasses continued to confidently demonstrate his determination. Writer is one of the most prestigious professions in the field. Prominent place in aspiration surveys. School children's professionals. When beat the young man with glasses if he knew how to control his aura. This one I thought I only knew a little. After a while, the man in the glasses was asked to demonstrate this ability. Despite his fear and uncertainty, he recomposed himself, sat on a bench and began to concentrate his aura. Lee Semin realized that the young man with glasses was doing well and congratulated him, pointing out that it should not stop there, to continue to progress. Our engineer explained that the main thing was to control the aura and that this ability had to be improved every day. As the man in the glasses leaves, said the young man was a smart boy and added that someday they would reach the top together. It was nice to hear from him because the support shows that someone really believes in him. Lisa and Min saw how inspired the was and realized that he had said everything he could. A moment later, the man in the glasses approached his friend by showing all with his attitude that he would continue to train and develop. Our failure on his part, thought how wonderful it was to infuse hope and faith in someone. However, grabbing his head with both hands, realized that he had been working too hard and that he could use a little rest and refreshment. After getting out of the shower, the young man dies of someone with authority, although it was not entirely clear what he was talking about. Went on to say that it was actually great and that therefore the best demon hunter had to wait a while to regain strength. The boy also knew that plate of the computer was very useful for learning new skills, and it really was. Told the others that today he was connected. As usual, he added that later was going to investigate a little to obtain his title of assailant, so he decided to check whether it was true that the advanced party of the exam would be random this time. However, everyone knew that the tasks were different every year and no one knew exactly what to expect. Could only make separate assumptions. Even after successfully surpassing written test, assessment of aura and combat skills, it was often only possible to obtain a certificate after an in-depth test. Last year was a debate. Sitting in front of our computer, wondered why the assailant needed this additional knowledge, as they seemed completely unnecessary. Lysaman thought that a good assailant, I just needed to fight and kill monsters, and that I did not need anything else. Reclining in his chair, he said aloud, there really are people who spend money on this. The young man thought so, and realized that that decision was not easy for him. Soon called to find out how much it cost, and whether it was possible to attend in person, after which he asked to be sent his account number. After hanging, Lee Semin thought about it and decided that was was enough. Although I did not quite understand what it was all about. After that, the young man decided that very soon everyone I would know about him and hear his name. The next day, our grandfather, as it had done over the past few months, back to the park for outdoor exercise. Despite the fact that the trainer controlled all in paradise, the young man did everything he could, stopped for a moment when he perceived a strange odor without understanding where it came from, turned his head and saw a girl running through the countryside. The beautiful realized immediately after he was looking at her and was paralyzed for a moment, trying to capture someone's gaze as they look at. Our grandfather realized that they already knew each other. Although the boy, I was doing everything I could not to prove it, the girl continued to wonder how he had lost so much weight. The young man, to the point that he barely recognized him, but read semen, realized that this did not prevent him from exercising. It turned out that the beauty was in no hurry. In fact, apologized for being so rude last time. A moment later, showed up and said his name was Kim Seonja. Our boy did not want to be rude, so he calmly told her his name. When his new asked him if he was a raider, boy honestly admitted that he had planned to take part in the tests in the near future. The beautiful smiled, wished her luck, and told her that she was also going to take the exam to join the company. It seemed that something had changed in the boy, because he said with a lot, I was looking forward to meeting her. After that, Lee Sen-min asked his new if he wanted to bet with him. Although the beautiful did not quite understand what the young man was talking about, explained that he was referring to him and the who. Kim Sung had already mentioned and pointed out that it would be interesting to see which of the two would win. The boy confirmed everything he had said before, although it seemed that Kim Sunja did not quite understand what I was talking about. However, after a moment, the girl thought of this argument, and also, if you really would not have supported the beautiful. I was angry, and thought to herself that it was not long ago this man had been a weakling, anyone, and now I was pretending be someone who was not. Only a few weeks later, our grandfather walked confidently toward the center to take your exams. Looking around at the young man, mentally appealed to the transcendence of the city, asking them to believe in him. Suddenly in the dark, Lee Semin saw by chance the boy with whom he had fought about a month ago. However, this did not frighten or infuriate our playing in the least, simply said in the voice high that I could not fail this exam. After everything that had happened to him, boy was still thinking that this time it would all be completely different, that would undoubtedly succeed. The exam began with a written test, and at that moment our grandfather realized that the test had become a little more difficult this year. Reading everything that was written, Lisa and Min realized that it really seemed difficult, and that there were many tricks in the questions. However, at the same time, understood that hard work always pays off and brings even greater rewards. Therefore, while studied, the young man did his best to emerge victorious. While working hard, the young man realized that he did not have no chance to follow an easy path, and that only continuous victory him. Although at that time, it seemed that the other participants, they were having a lot worse time than he was, they did not prove it. It was interesting to see if the first part was so difficult. That would be in the advanced test. After a while, the instructor told everyone to watch his watches and added that it was time to finish, so they had to leave the pens behind and raise your hands. The man noticed that from that moment on, anyone who moved would be immediately dis. Our grandfather completed the task, while the young people who did not listen to the professor and continued writing some attracted attention. Teacher did not wait, and the temporarily immobilized the professor reiterated that he had warned everyone and added that he did not like to be disobeyed, so he did what he had to do. Pointing to the students, the man said they were dis and who had to drop out of the exam. Immediately continued, saying that for assailants who risk their lives, discipline is paramount. Any small mistake endangers the entire team, and the rules are there to be followed. He added that no one likes assailants who do not follow the rules, and then, with a kind tone of desire, good luck to all, and told them they were doing well. The young people gathered there commented on the exam and the possibility of failing, but it was just as important to them to know where his aura was. Our failure on his part decided that the test was difficult, but I did not think I had failed because it had been prepared a lot and had learned the material. Knew that in order to obtain certification, its aura level should be at least 5,000, and the last time he took the test he had 5,100. While Lee Semin skillfully controlled on aura, unwitting witnesses watched him closely as if they have never seen anything like it, but none of that mattered to the young man. I knew I had to try. Clear your mind and relax for everything to go well. The young man imagined it again and again, repeating to himself that he would undoubtedly succeed because it could not be otherwise. Yet the terrifying visions related to the exam prevented him from relax completely and concentrate on what him. That moment the young man remembered his mentor and decided to follow his advice. The highest symbols represent the magnitude of all things and phenomena of the universe, young heaven and earth, as well as primordial accessibility, kindness and righteousness to control. Aura is associated with many different memories, sometimes not very pleasant. Remembering the first time he read Semin spoke of his desire to become a writer, thought for himself. That time his parents believed in it, and it seemed to him that everything had been worth it. The young man was deeply moved because he understood how important it is to have someone who believes in you all your life. The young man could not finish their studies and reflection because the professor approached him suddenly and asked him what he was doing. After that the professor noted that the control of the aura should be practiced in a safe place, which is the basis of the basic. Watching the reflection, our grandfather said he knew, but sometimes I just had no choice. The man supported him, explaining that once had practiced this in a forest full of smiles. This his interest, and the professor explained that this was the fate of the assailant, that any battle was dangerous and that sometimes it was extremely necessary to control mana. Adjusting the glasses, the man stared at the young man, but I was not angry at all. He also said that once he walked through the door, were found with a large number of creatures of all kinds, among which was a stranger named Black Hole. During their first meeting, with this discovery the assailant was unable to obtain sufficient information to identify it, and since then, no one has seen him again. At that time, one of the students entered the room and said that the second part of the exam would start very soon and that they had to prepare themselves. The man, addressing Lisa and Min, thanked him for the warning and added that he himself would carry out the second part of the exam. Turning to the young man, the teacher explained that it was time to go up to the second floor, where they had already met all other participants. With a smile, I wished to name the young man. Excellent result. The young man enjoyed talking to this person, for which he thanked him everything I had done for him. After a while, upon arrival at the correct room, the young man said he wanted to measure el valor de su aura and was told that she would have to wait a bit. Lisa and Min stood in line, realizing that he only had to sit down and to prove his aura. There was nothing to scare him, although he was very nervous. A few seconds later, a strange noise was heard coming from the room, and all the test subjects began to wonder what was going on. Colombian left the room and shared your impressions. Although the snow was still discussing what was happening, suddenly the young man announced who had measured his aura and stopped. A moment later continued and explained that the girl's score was 30,000. The most incredible thing I have ever seen. When we heard those numbers, our grandfather opened his eyes wide. I have never seen anything like it before, and I did not even think it was possible. The young people began to discuss this news because they had never heard anything like it, and they did not believe that anyone could develop their abilities to such an extent. All of a sudden, one of the test subjects approached Lee Semin and told him in a low voice that everyone was commenting that a girl called Brett Yubi was capable of doing amazing things. When he heard this, the boy was simply stunned. The reason was not how high their scores were, but who she was. The young man knew her. It is more, she had looked for it herself few months before to meet him, and today it turned out to be the strongest among the strongest. In response to our engineer's question on whether people who approve this test will be available to you, he thought he would not, and that it will most likely not happen since all the kids are strong. Despite this, Lee Semin was quite worried. I knew that the last time he measured his aura was at 5100, and I expected it to at least go up a bit. The line advanced quite a bit, and after a few minutes, the investigators addressed our called and was told to enter the room. Frightened young man knew what he had to do, but in spite of it he was nervous, as if I had come to this place for the first time. Represented in the camera, the young man heard the person who was going to perform the test tell him not to. Nervous at the beginning of the procedure, the boy squeezed his eyes with all his strength. In fact, I was very nervous even though I was trying not to show it. A moment later, the suspect addressed the test subject by its name. After that, LY announced that the Ollie score of Lee will be Minera de 7180. When the young man got up, the suspect told him that all tests had finished and that he could leave. At last the young man was able to express his emotions, was pleased to have made such progress in just 1 month, and it was a real victory for him. However, instead of going about his business, the young man began to so much that he won on the ground, calling all brothers and sisters. Few minutes later, Lee S.E. Min began to cry, expressing their desire that the people working in that place would be very lucky in the future. The joy of our grandfather had no limits. He repeated several times that he had achieved something completely incredible, something I had always fought for. At that time, Boy received a message. Boy proposed him to go out to eat together. The city was as busy as ever, despite the fact that the sun was already putting itself on the horizon. Sitting in one of the premises, Lee Semin was staring at something, completely immersed in his own world, and it was true that he was. Nibbling the tooth from his cocktail, the young man reflected on the fact that this world was not really just one, but was full of possibilities. But he did not have time to finish his thinking, because a girl he knew well appeared in front of him. Boy said in a voice high that she felt extremely safe, not only in company, but also in life in general, because it had a base very strong up his sleeve. Turned out that beauty had no equal. Really felt as a person who knew his or her value in this world. The young man thought about it and felt a little envious of this beauty, wanted to make strong enough to compete with her someday. However, at that time, he did not hear anyone touching his back, and instead of joy, screamed in fear, was the same group of people who had signed up for the Colombian approximately 1 month ago, and now I wanted to know how they had gone to his friend's exams. Smiling, the young man pointed out that everything had come out of Moscow, wanted to celebrate the occasion and name his friend. They wanted to eat. A little time passed, and soon everyone had on the table a delicious pig with many different spices. Said that today he had realized how important it is to live life to the fullest, and that therefore intended to take action. At the same time, asked the kids not to be shy and to eat. The man in the glasses, at the sight of the young man frying meat, asked him why he had not become, for example, manager of a meat restaurant where you could combine business with pleasure. Immediately added that if such an ignorant person were to become position of a meat restaurant, one could imagine the true misfortune it would represent for the nation. After After that the kids laughed, pointing out that in reality, each of them had its own way, so if they did not stick to, he could get in trouble. At the same time, the door was opened and our scientists saw a group of young people, among which was the girl with the high heels, or indices. The young people said there were 5 adults, so they would like to choose a spacious table. As you approach and look at Lee Semin Ryder, told the young man that they had met again. Turning to her friend Kim Sonia, noted that the boy in front of her was the same one who claimed to be able to defeat it with eyes closed. While the Morena presented our tribute, realized that he had. There was a small misunderstanding. It turned out that the high scores were not his, but of the whom he had come to support. The beauty wished the young man good profit and added that he should not forget his bet. In anger in his voice, the young man wanted to retract his words and declared in a voice high that I had never said anything of the sort before. While saying goodbye in the street, our grandfather's new friend asked who the girls were, who seemed very beautiful and pleasant, insinuating that they would like to meet them. Lisa Emin proudly stated that it should never be judge a book by its cover. Lunging at the boys continued, pointing out that girls should be chosen with care, and added that the best thing for all 3 of them would be to go to November 1 bar. However, as soon as the kids started walking, heard a strange and subtle and a movement behind them. Reed Sungman found this extremely strange, so he stopped for a moment to turn around. The boy did not understand what was happening, saw strange light, more like lightning, that existed on their own. Our grandfather's friends immediately began to wonder what was going on, since I had never noticed anything like this before. At that time, it seemed that everything was clear to the young man, so he turned to Jinshae and Jimmy. Pushing his friends forward, the young man shouted that they should leave the place as soon as possible. Our grandfather thought to himself that he had a bad feeling, although I had not yet seen the panorama completeness of what was happening. Literally a second later, a brilliant ace of light that sprang from the ground that was not only light but also one of the most powerful energies. Grabbing his friend, Lee Semin said in a frightened tone that it was a door. Immediately began painting to all present that a door had opened in that place, which indicated a high level of risk and danger. At that time, all passers-by noticed that the ground was cracked and that from it emanated powerful energy currents in different directions. The kids had read about something like this, but they could not believe that soon would encounter it on a normal night and without anything special. Huge yellow hole shot from the ground, enraged and grunting, demonstrating all its power. R thought to himself that it was Sincus, of which I had heard about and read many times. His mere appearance made passers-by, including our failures, knocked to the ground by a powerful surge of energy. However, the young man was not surprised by this. Concentrated on his body and looked at, fixed forward. Boy did not understand why he could not move, while it's well known, shouted to everyone to abandon the street immediately. The girl turned to her assistant and asked for help, realizing that in such a situation, excess people would only get in the way. Everyone knew that the association represented was not one of the big 3, but it was still an elite assault company. A moment later, something strange began to happen. Turned out that the boys were not going to call anyone. They wanted to eliminate that boy as soon as possible. The intrepid Kim Sunja immediately one of his weapons and headed for the suspect. Beauty began to wield her sword in the hope of inflicting at least some damage to the chest before help arrived, just in case they could not handle it for themselves. But 1 minute later, something went wrong. Frightened girl stared in front of her without clearly understanding what had happened. Another monster named York appeared right in front of the beautiful, which meant that instead of a mirror, now I had to fight 2 Kim. Sunja was among these suspects, and it appeared to have no idea how to act in such a situation, to inflict harm and stay safe. The beautiful screamed. Immediately, someone who blocked the threat or protected someone, one of the heroes, attacked the person who was closest to him, our grandfather, or I, as this one was also asking for desperately helps, but Liza. I was so confused I did not know what to do. Despite this squeezing fist, the boy repeated to himself that he had to go and help because I had not trained hard for several months at all. At the sight of strangers staring at their friend, Lisa and Min ordered her body to obey, and it began to move little by little. And Jay clearly had no intention of giving up, so he swinged his arm to strike his mighty opponent. Work. In less than a minute, one of the heroes was already on the ground. In spite of this, the young man was not going to give up. Holding his stick, he stared at the second beast, preparing to counterattack. Seeing all this, our grandfather reflected about the fact that his friend, that he had never received adequate training, would be able to do something like this. The young man fought with all possible courage, as if I had seen these guys more than once. In fact, who did not know that Jean Jay was a normal student might think it was a assailant who had been for several years dedicated to it. At that time, Lisa and Min thought that his would undoubtedly become into one of the most incredible monster hunters. However, 1 minute later, something happened that the young man did not expect. The boy pounced on Njay's chest, and the next bite could be deadly. Aware that any delay could cost him his life, our grandfather ran to his friend. That moment, the young man was already lay on the ground, and the predator stared at him with no intention of stop. Despite its proximity and speed, Lysamin seemed unable to approach his opponent. Suddenly found a spear somewhere and prepared to throw it into the desert. Bloodthirsty, the result was immediate, and the predator was defeated. Our grandfather heard one of the assailants ask if the young man was okay, and Jean thought it was okay, but that there was a person wound on the ground that needed help. Raising his friend, Lisa and Min immediately began to attend to him, realizing that the young man had done something incredible. Another assailant approached them and beat Shi if he had really woken up, since he fought like a real beast. The young man was weakened and did not want to speak speak or explain anything. I was just waiting for help. At that time Lee Min thought he had used the power of his aura to stop the enemy and help your friend. And that is where their thoughts ended. Our flies were so absorbed in their own thought who forgot that danger was still near. At that moment the beautiful redhead screamed asking for quickly to all the assailants who came to it. Thanks to the power flow of energy issued by all assailants, managed to defeat the Argentine. Turning to his colleague, the beauty said that for such a big mirror was quite, and that was a big problem for all of them. Immediately added that he knew a way to destroy the universe, that he could not reach his head. Although the girl already understood that help had arrived, the most important thing was to attract by crossing a trap and attacking it from the other side. At the same time, it was clear that it was not the first time that the girl faced something like this, so she felt as safe as possible and understood clearly his task. Kim Sunja jumped to the building at lightning speed to get to the right place and achieve the desired result. In an instant the beauty was flying. Powerful flow of mana in his hand, and without forgetting, take your weapon, was incredible. A true raider sent by God that faced perfectly to his task, and he could deal with almost any threat. Pointing her gun at the enemy, the beautiful shouted that he was taking revenge to all those who are playing had threatened. Kim Sunja felt extremely confident. It was clear that he had faced situations similar hundreds of times before and knew how to choose the right approach. In just 1 minute, corpse was already lying on the ground, which meant that the assailant had managed to accomplish the task. Because of this, the girl smiled and said it was a really difficult task, that they had managed to defeat such a powerful enemy. To that, said it looked like the doors would close soon and that there was not much time left. However, our contemporaries observed carefully because thought they saw something that others had not noticed. Effectively, in the center there were monkey-like monsters, but very large and with huge fangs. Leisman could not look away from them, limited himself to a close eye on the creatures, trying to figure out what would happen next. It seemed that the door was getting smaller and smaller, but the mirror was not going to be revealed. However, the young man, I knew for sure that the boy was watching him, although the reasons for them remained unknown. At that time, Jean felt something incredibly immense and strange. However, soon realized what had happened to the young man who had been attacked by the Argentine. Our boy was glad to see that he was okay, thanks to the young man, that he had not been afraid to fight the poison. Smiling, the boy said that although he was not an accomplished assailant, was the least they could do in such a situation. When the ambulance had already arrived, Lee Semin confirmed that everything had gone well and that they had done very well. The next day, while on the set, the boy reflected on how they had discovered and life was back to normal. However, the battle against the Greeks turned out to be different from what I had imagined. If it had not been for the snow and the skills of the assailants who were near, our grandfather could have died, and that was the harsh reality. The young man kept thinking about what had happened, remembering the terrifying images that were impossible to forget. It was at that moment that he understood and realized that it was not a game, but of a very serious and dangerous situation. At that time, the coach approached and told him it was too late and that he had to go home, drying the sweat on his forehead. The young man told himself that he had been told the truth. Effectively, it was too late. Kim Dok-bae knew something important had happened and calmly offered the young man a chamomile tea. Calm down. Sitting at the table, the man expressed his sorrow because MJ would have been injured and because the events would have occurred at the wrong time and place. Hearing this, the young man began to talk about the awakened teachers, and Kim Dok-bae proved that he knew a lot about these events and that he knew that the young man, I was taking exams at the time. Lowering my eyes slightly, the young man admitted that when he first encountered Argentines, his whole body became numb and it was extremely strange and incomprehensible. The trainer stared at him but did not rush to respond. It was difficult to find the right word. Placed the cup on the table, admitted that while he cared about himself, his best friend had suffered. With the young man singing in his voice, asked if I would be able to become a good assailant in the future, as it had shown weakness in the initial stage. Kim Dok-bae observed the young man, watching him fight with himself, but again he was not in a hurry to say anything. Finally, the master revealed that before opening the hole, he himself had been an actor, what many found hard to believe. The young man was interested in the to hear this and noted that the trainer was probably the first to knocking out his opponents with a single blow. Laughing, the man admitted that indeed had been lost in his own thoughts. After a brief pause, told the events that had I found a young man at that time. This person had suffered a fracture and had died in the middle of fight. Coach was so affected by this, who decided not to return to the ring. Never again, because I just could not do it. After that, the man beat him. To Lizaman why he had told him about his brief and sad history, then added that it was time to stop sympathizing with himself and with the past. While serving another cup, the mentor went on to say that what he did fact was, and that the young man should not lock himself in his room, weeping for the mistakes of the past for the rest of his life. All people make mistakes. Of course, one can regret it. For example, if a vital blow was given to an opponent and it did not stop in time. Question is that sooner or later, everyone experiences fear, but in spite of this, should not be with the past. To move forward to find something true truly valuable. Behind these words the men toasted with their drinks, as a sign that they were leaving behind the unpleasant past. Kim Dog-bae asked the young man again who would win if they faced each other, he of the past, and he of the present. The young man thought he was most likely to win, the man of the past. The mentor laughed and explained that this was not the case, since in the past it was much weaker. Did not make sense now, and the mentor remained silent, then said that the young man had become stronger, both physically and mentally, which meant that he had every chance of becoming a true. The young man was glad to hear this and to believe in oneself even more. Took a short sip of rum. Lee Semin left the glass on the table and thought for a moment before he spoke. Then, with determination in his voice, stated that his mentor was absolutely right. The next day he went to Taesong Academy, where I was going to fight against one of his teachers in the field. The young man stood with his eyes closed, but in their hand held a weapon with which he was going to strike. The young man not only held his sword, concentrated mana, in his hands so that the blow, as strong and precise as possible. A moment later, appeared in the room on hologram of one of the predators with which the rookie fight. As this is how the rookies they could perfect their abilities. The beast growled, and it was clear that he was about to pounce on the young man who was waiting for that moment. The suspect did not pounce on the assailant, but rather knocked teeth into his gun with the intention of depriving the young man of his main weapon. However, the enemy failed, since the young man threw it deftly to the opposite corner of the room. Leisman, standing blindfolded, could only rely on his own. At that time, the young man began to think that this boy was weak, and then corrupted himself for not being able to beat him last time. Suddenly the instructor shouted, saying that the most important thing was no, give in to anger and not let emotions take over. Of everything else, Lisa Emmett recognized his mentor, who understood, and that he wanted to continue with the training. The young man asked to turn on the Sinkus hologram, the same whom he had not been able to defeat in the street. Only a few seconds passed and the young man's request was filled. In front of him was a formidable opponent. The young man felt the predator with his whole body and was ready to fight despite their fear. In an instant the young man struck with force to attack his opponent and finish him off as quickly as possible, though the blows did not reach their target as desired. In this virtual world, a little time passed and the young man felt something powerful rising above him, although I did not understand what it was. Straightening up and grabbing his sword more tight, Leisman began to twist energy flows again, in the hope that this time it would work. The beast watched the young man intently and growled, demonstrating that he would not even give up to a hologram. Suddenly the reflection removed the paw and placed it right next to the young man, who miraculously used to jump to dodge it, holding the gun in front of him. Leisman repeated to himself that the most important thing was to unite his body and mind. At that moment he realized that with his new power could defeat without any problem. While the young man thought this, the energy crashed against the place where he was. The mirror was not real but imitated everything that could happen in the real world, so those moments could not be ignored. The young man was not angry, understood that the more he perfected his style of martial arts, better understood his own thinking. The young man knew that in this battle he could not relax, had to concentrate completely to make everything right. Its perception took it back to the day the door was open. It seemed that the young man wanted to immerse oneself in the spirit of this event, to decide something for himself, or prove something to yourself, of course, only facing the hologram of an angel, but all his thoughts were in his head and directly related to how to fight the battle correctly. Predator screamed as loudly as it could while releasing a powerful jet of energy. Only a few days passed, and it was time for the second phase of the exam, which took place in the Coliseum. The room was crowded and the tension was palpable, as all the examinees were expecting real battles. Each student is assigned a weapon that he would use to show himself in the best possible way. During the exam, Leisman immediately thought that although he was in a training center, the accessories looked very old and worn out. The other kids were arguing who would participate in that day's event and who had a platinum brand. At that time, a young man appeared before the meeting, congratulated to all those who had passed the first phase of the exam, and talked about the preparation. The armor worn by the examinees was equipped with sensors that recorded the fatal blows, and the opponent was defeated. After that, the students' movements would be restricted, and the main task was to neutralize to the largest possible number of opponents. Prize would be for the last one left in the field. After signing the document, all students went to the exam site. While the students assimilated the information, teacher wished them good luck and told them they would see each other a little later. The young people were in no hurry to leave, pending further instructions or explanations. After a while, all gathered outside in a large square. Teacher's voice announced that there were 5 minutes left to go before the start of the exam. Now students were wondering if they should choose their own seats or stay where they were. Suddenly, one of the teachers appeared in front of them and warned them that the exam would soon begin. At that time, a stranger approached Liz Min and suggested that he stand a little further away. The young man stopped and admitted that he had decided to observe from the background. However, the boy Redhead did not like that and looked closely at Lee. Seeming the young man was upset because someone had chosen his own and decided to strike blows, decisive in demonstrating their strength and intelligence. In the process stated Ly that I did not have in a hurry and that he had a lot of time. It was clear that the combat would be intense and that none of the participants were going to give in. While hitting his red-haired opponent, shouted that now was the time to get to know each other better. Sin embargo, Lee Semin thoughts completely different and did not understand why he had to waste his energy and your time in this. That time the young man dropped his gun, but it was part of his deliberate plan, and it worked a moment later. Was already hitting his opponent with his bare hand. The boy was determined, although I did not understand why he was running such a risk by renouncing his weapon to the judges, who observed the action, turned to the opponent of R. I need number 222, and announced their defeat. Lying on the floor, the young man could not understand why he had chosen such an unusual, but nothing could be changed. Lifting the visor on his cap, Lee Semin listened carefully to what the judges were saying, and learned that the number 13 was receiving extra points for A. The young man realized that he had to move on, turned around, picked up his sword, and turned toward his opponent. Several judges gathered in the control room, watching what was happening on the screen and discussing what they saw. That time looked at number 222 and wondered why there were been eliminated from the fight so quickly. Wondered who that strong man was, that he had achieved what seemed impossible. Another judge said in the voice high that there were rumors that the Iron Horse Association had a talented new member. Another man added that he had also heard talk about a girl whose aura already exceeded 30,000. Kim Sun-ha immediately joined the conversation and noted that its new member, he was trying very hard. The beauty thought to herself that all the judges quite calm, and that all those present inspired confidence. Mientras tanto, the contestants in the field listened to the judges one by one, to those who had failed the test and were left with automatically eliminated. At the same time, number 172 received extra points for defeating 3 opponents. Recalled the phrase of the best fly hunter of all times: fighting with the use of aura is like submitting to yourself. It is in fact a powerful process, comparable to almost nothing else, since it involves energy. Therefore, the aura should be activated at all times. But it was not just the aura itself that was important, but also the ability to combine it with the arts. Martial arts, fighting monsters, is very different from hunting animals with weapons. In the battle against Thess, Raider risks not only his life, but also his charisma. Everyone knows that this is the real one, Battle of Raider, that you have heard so much about, but they can only experience it during actual combat. Of course, what was happening in the field was just but I gave an idea of what the hunters in the dungeons, while the judges announced the eliminated players. Our grandfather ran into the depths of the forest. People in the conference room observed carefully, commented on how Min Ri was proving to be quite fast, and they did not know who the young man really was, but some added that it was really strong, as it had defeated many rivals that were starting with as great favorites. That moment, the beautiful redhead looked at him more closely and realized who he was, and was so surprised that he even opened his mouth. The young men asked him if he knew the young man who was completing all tasks with such skill. Beauty admitted that she knew him a little bit, but did not go into details. Time passed. For some it flew quickly. For others it seemed like an eternity. As the battles continued, the Morena on which the company was betting did everything possible for overcoming their opponents and becoming stronger. Seemed like he never got tired, and that he did not care whatever got in her way. The beautiful, I knew what I wanted, and tried not to pay attention to others. Contestants at that time, the judges announced again that one of the boys had been defeated, which meant that with every minute that passed, there were fewer and fewer students left in the field. Upon hearing this, the Morena was glad, wondering who his next opponent would be, eager to finish the fight as soon as possible. However, his attention was attracted by a noise unusual that came from everywhere. Suddenly Lee Semin appeared in front of her, observed the Morena with attention. Without talking or starting the fight, the girl came out first, clearly recognizing the boy, although he did not mention his name. Recalled that this young man had been on the street when the portal opened, but he had not joined the fight, had just stood there watching. I knew that all the kids were trying to prove something, but other than that the young man did absolutely nothing. And the most interesting, the beautiful woman did not even try it. Embarrassed, did not think of nothing more to say, that had not been seen for a long time. After that, mentioned that he had heard rumors that he and Kim Song-ha had argued before the examination began. In spite of this, the Morena thought to herself that her future rival, he used to be a very ordinary boy and had a hard time, believed that he could easily defeat his opponents. The girl thought to herself that someone with good skills, I would be afraid of a rejection. Could this be true? In voice Hai suggested not to waste time and to start the battle now. The beautiful wielded his sword, believing in his own strength, but she was confused by this young man, and I did not quite believe I was capable of anything serious. Soon the young people began their struggle. Although it seemed the most unusual situation possible, Lee Seaman observed his opponent and thought to himself that the Morena had happened so fast that I had not even had time to understand anything, much less thinking about anything. The girl's aura was really overwhelming, and it could not be denied. It radiated genuine strength and power. The young man knew it would not be easy, but he was not going to give up, as he had trained to achieve its ultimate goal. The Morena did not know what to expect either, and simply fought face to face, as it had done until now. Unexpectedly, the beautiful, trying to find the weak point of R continues, and hit him with all his might in the solar plexus, was unpleasant and forced the young man to sit down for a while. What he gave to him and his opponent the opportunity to rest a little. The beautiful thought about how his opponent was clearly weaker than she did, but in spite of this he continued to clinging to his and showed no sign of surrendering. The Morena realized that the young man was still having a clear advantage in terms of skill, although he was still slightly weaker than her. Therefore he wasted no time and analyzed carefully the weaknesses of his opponent, planning to adjust their future tactics. Raising the hand, the student decided that this could not go on like this, and that it was urgently necessary to change. The reason for this was that the idea that someone would be better than her filled her with anger. I had always believed that it could not be so. That moment the beauty made a powerful movement, deciding that he longed for victory, and that I would not give up fight for anything in the world. Lysaman had never seen anything like it before, and for a moment it seemed to him that his opponent had become a hero. Perhaps it was an illusion. Knew that the sword he conquered, demons, had an unlimited power, and the character leaning on the leaf meant something magical. Inside the sword was hidden a demon that could awaken. The sword completely subjugates its owner, and whoever possesses the ability can show bloodlust similar to that of a real toy. In fact, at that time the Morena seemed as determined and cruel as possible, giving the impression that nothing and no one would stop her. Lysaman felt the incredible aura of his opponent and did not understand how it managed to show such bloodlust. Everything I could see seemed terrifying to him. In spite of this, the young man was sure. That day the girl saw her fear of rejection, so he chose that. Our grandfather stood still and thought about his actions, realizing that the main thing was not to rush, because in those moments it was easy to make mistakes. The boy remembered his training well, and was not going to give up just because his opponent knew a little more than he did. Grabbing his sword, the young man's eyes showed determination, not only to fight, but to win. The Morena realized this, and said that the young man had changed since the last time they were seen. The young man had no intention of surrender and proudly declared that he was not one of those guys who got beat easily. Also read Semen noted that he had nowhere to flee the place, but that he did not want to run away anywhere, as he wanted to face his fear head on. The opponents were paralyzed. None of them seemed willing to attack first, only staring at each other. Time passed, and the young people remained face to face. After a moment the Morena decided it was time to start, as I wanted to finish everything as soon as possible and emerge as the only winner. Our grandfather is constantly thinking about the same thing, was not going to back down, and was ready to take the hit. However, before the boys had the opportunity to show judges to their full potential, announced aloud that the test was over. While still facing each other, the side opposites could not understand why the test had ended so unexpectedly. When the boys fall to the ground, heard again that the second phase of the examination had ended, and that all the wounded had to follow the instructions and search for medical care. Our mirror lay there and stared at the sky without understanding what had happened to him. Smiling, said aloud that he was crawling, being alive and not having been eliminated in this difficult test phase. Upon entering the building, teacher indicated to all the students where they should go next, as it was not clear who could continue and who could not. That time, all the examinees met in the great room, and professor announced that it had concluded the last part of the exam. His difficulty lay in the fact that each task would be different. Even if the participants obtained excellent results in the first and second phases, could fail in the last, which they had to take into account. Our looked intently at the sheet of paper he had in front of me, although I did not quite understand what it was for. For a moment the young man decided that now they would evaluate for their writing skills. Presentation. At that time the professor announced that the final part of the aptitude test would be an editorial staff. The man stated that during the exam, students could not get up from their seats or move, otherwise they would be had to write about the assailant, or more precisely, about why each of them had decided to choose this winery. Rumors immediately spread throughout the room. Not everyone was able to express his thoughts clearly. Our affection was confused, because I did not know if I could write about a video I had seen by chance, and that it had inspired him was also not clear. Whether or not he had to link his history with his childhood, the only thing I was clear about was that I did not know where to start to write about his desire to become a raider. Time passed, but read Semen. He did not even take a pencil to start writing, because he could not order his thoughts. When you think of the raiders, only one person comes to mind when seeing and remembering. The boy wanted his tractor will stop playing dirty. Reason was that this evil guy always messed with the weakest ones, calling orphan to paradise and me in the affairs of others. At that time, the young man's memories went back to his child when he stood alone and watched the huge window behind which fell affection. When the child accepted the idea that he would remain alone, was adopted by his current parents, came his mother and father, who always saw him as a child in need of love. Despite this, they did not always talk about how much they loved their child, but the feeling was so strong that it could be felt. The young man remembered how one day, these people sat it down and started a serious conversation about how everyone is born with a specific purpose. Explained to him that his task was to raise him and guide him on the right path, taking into account that you read see me. He was still a child at that time. He did not understand of all that his parents were trying to convey to him. One of our days, opened a garbage can and saw some strange envelopes that intrigued him greatly. Taking one of the envelopes, the child thought that perhaps the adults wanted to protect him, since recently had learned of the death of his biological mother. Lisa and Min read what he had written inside and then put the envelope back in. The memories took the young man to a later period, when his parents gave him advice and told him to eat well and not to let himself. His father pointed out that he was taking the training that his son son not only had to live up to his name. Although the young man did not understand what he was talking about, the man explained that it meant peace and min meant people. Turned out that he could become a robber that always helps other people and comes to their aid in the most difficult moments. Bowing to his parent, our grandfather promised that it would undoubtedly be so, and thanked them for raising him to be a wonderful person. At that time, the teacher said that there were 5 minutes to finish the exam, and that the students had to be described in detail why they had decided to become assailant and how they saw the main mission of a hunt. At that time, Lysaman thought about how the boys had taken over humanity and that the only force that could oppose them was Aura. However, did not understand why they had given to him and what was his purpose in this world. The young man recalled to the warrior who was by the river and told him that he was no ordinary person and that the mentor had to understand it forever. Went on to say that the young man had to transcend to stop doubting himself. A moment later, the young man remembered his friend after the battle, wishing the world could become in a much better place. Despite the fact that his friend was now in the hospital, the young man also remembered his mentor that reassured him and told him that he would become an excellent assailant and that could ensure the safety of all. While Sinjay was talking about the book, therefore the young man decided for himself that the most important thing for him were the people's confidence as well as peace and in the world. Realizing that he was not the best time to stay in the memories, especially because the test had ended a few days ago, our grandfather decided to ask his friend when he would be discharged. Jeans, I thought it would not be soon, and to study in the hospital ward would not find it difficult for him to. A moment later, the young man asked his friend if he knew the root formula. Square smiled as a joke and added that the young man was still a little dumber than he was. The conversation soon derived to the fact that Ing Che, I was planning to become a firefighter. The boy thought was funny when he left. Our grandfather answered some questions and said that most likely was to see each other again in 2 years' time, not before. The young man heard his friend say he was going to visit him, but asked him not to. While walking down the street, Reed Semet recalled how he had finished the aptitude test and how he had been told that he was now going to be recruited by the army. The young man was devastated, saddened him. Waste 2 precious years of his youth, incomprehensible tasks instead of to develop into and become an excellent assailant despite being on a busy street. The young man was not afraid and stated aloud that all this was a true irony of his state. The immortal squadrons were specialized units formed by awake individuals who had not passed the expulsion tests, and that is where they would soon send him. Called how recently his mentor had told him that he had to acquire his own weapon, although at that time I did not understand why it was necessary. The young man explained that everyone should have their own weapon, as the state would not be able to provide one to each of them. Standing outside the store, our grandfather bowed his head, apparently indifferent to everything around him, feeling completely torn apart and exhausted. Upon entering the Liz Min store, he heard someone greeting him and spoke in the same way. The sales clerk looked closely to the customer and asked if it was really a resonator, with eyes already full of anger and hatred. Listening to the girl, the young man said he wanted to see the marks. The sales clerk explained that the weapon was mounted on the outside, simple on the inside, and added that it was exactly people were saying about the blades. Then the girl said that of course sold any two-handed sword, so if I wanted to, buying one would be no problem. Everyone knows that the claymores are weapons of great historical importance, and along with Japanese sword, many prefer them to modern weapons. While the saleswoman offered him the two-handed sword, boy thought about how a heart of sadness is a great weapon, but the price is high, so most people choose simpler sword. When he picked up the gun, the boy decided that he did not have sense to buy something expensive, also could not afford it. Looked like Lee Semet was quite sick with what he had in his hands, as he felt safe enough. The seller pointed out the sword was of excellent quality for a small company of this farmer and also could not worry about her and use her without fear. The young man realized that the decision was taken and chose this particular weapon. Upon leaving the store, the saleswoman wished the boy good service, but this bothered him as he wanted to act independently. While walking down the street, boy thought that if something could not be avoided, then I should try to enjoy it, so he decided to prepare diligently to retake the test. The young man knew for sure that in order to achieve his goal to move forward near this flight area, interesting events were taking place. Taepyeon Wujai of the Special Forces unit of the Immortals was scolding someone. The reason was that he was angry because the boy had decided to buy a gun, but instead of giving explanation, simply apologized. A moment later, explained that had suggested that he do it earlier. Young Wuyi was upset about what he had learned, understood that most likely was that it was a joke that he had fallen into. The man casually turned to his assistant, told him he had an interesting job for himself. Portuguese soldier June observed the scene carefully and thought it was indeed true too. 1 minute later, turned to our reflection, who was immediately called Yu Gil. June told the young man to follow her quick. Boy did not know what to expect but decided to focus on its objective and ignore all the unpleasantness of the soldier. Explained that Corporal always treated new recruits this way, but he did not know if I would return the gun to him. 1 minute later, the conversation passed. What Lee Seaman would like to eat, that he was also hungry. Sitting at the table, thanked his new, even though he was his superior, observing what was happening on Tuesday, came to the conclusion this place was very different from the regular army, as there were shortages of personnel here, arming themselves with courage. The young man replied to. Yugelhun did know what they were doing there, since there were so many people. However, he explained that no one knew about it. All those who came here believed that this place was for those who had failed the raider, but in reality it was still a mystery. Then the soldier asked a strange question about what would happen if he did not succeed. Stop the murderer. After thinking for a moment about the young man, began to wonder what kind of problems might arise. After a while of thought, decided to discuss this topic in more detail. Went on to say that he had heard that in the past there had been a major crisis in the areas where the retro system had not been developed, and received assistance from neighboring countries. All imagined huge and dangerous formations, but after a minute Yugeljun changed the subject and said they should get up immediately. Although he did not explain the main reason passed a little time and the young people were already on the street, looking somewhere. The soldier calmly headed to our grandfather and told him to follow him. For someone who had just woken up, it was no problem to skip the sufficiently high enough to reach the upper platform. Even though he read Sem had trained hard, found it pleasant to see something like this. I did not think it was possible to have these skills, but the young man could not finish his thought, because at that moment the soldier yelled at him to leave, put aside his doubts and go up to him. The young man could not jump so high, so he decided to, grabbing onto one of the overhangs to gain momentum. Yugeljun continued to watch him close, said nothing. A moment passed and the young man found himself next to the soldier. Although he did not find it easy, Lisa and Min listened to the praise and felt uncomfortable, because the effort had been worth it. Staring at the mountains, the soldier asked the young man if he could see anything, then added that the northern part of the area, demilitarized, was a place where strangers wandered. The young man continued, explaining that creatures were living there, and that it was a place which should not be entered under any circumstances. The boy listened carefully to the story, but remained silent. Because I did not know how to answer, Yugeljun calmly pointed out that unexpected situations could arise there, as there were too many dangers of all kinds. The young man's expression changed slightly, and his friend said he was probably scared, although the young man himself began to deny it. Once again the soldier looked carefully at the fenced area. Lisa Emin remained silent, but he thought to himself that it was a beginning completely new to him, and that it was therefore worth taking advantage of. The next day the young man woke up earlier than he had done in a long time. Clock struck 5 a.m. Although everyone else was still asleep, decided to get up and get down to work. On leaving for the corridor, the young man saw his mentor struggling to stay awake. It was obvious that I really wanted to sleep. Meeting our grandfather, boy greeted him and told him to read Semin. Had woken up very early. On Tuesday we asked him for breakfast, found out it would be rice, soup, kimchi and fried pork. After that the young man poured water into a container and went directly to the corridor. Before arriving at its destination, a voice rang out of that it was time to get up. Finally entering one of the rooms, Lee Semin ran the stairs and also told everyone that it was time to get up. The young man approached SGT Kim Huian, clearly had no intention of getting up, and told him it was in the morning and that it was time for everyone to get up so that it would not look ridiculous. Our grandfather suggested drinking some water and said that the captain half would make the morning roster pass. After that, all the kids slowly began to prepare themselves and to dress up. Turning to our reflection, the sergeant asked him if he had made the bed and received a satisfactory response. Only a few minutes passed and all the kids were already on the street where the training was carried out by SGT. Said that the soldiers would arrive after their mission, so they had to make sure that the kids rest well. The soldier turned to Lee Semin and told him that the platoon leader was always watching, so they should be alert. The boy said he understood, but I wanted to know on which mission the boys had been. His new replied that he did not know either, but that there were heard that it had taken place in the northern part. Added that North Korea was almost completely under the attack of Thes, and that the soldiers controlled several areas, but they were also surrounded by the Greeks. As a result, South Korea and China had formed their own borders to maintain bay to the Argentine, helping the North tote them and the South to defend itself. After that, the young man told Lisa and Min that he would not dare to look the sergeant in the eye, John Woo-yoon, since he really hates that kind of attitude. It had not been long before the kids were already free and discussed what they would be offered for lunch. Upon entering one of the rooms, the soldier greeted the boys and told them that they had not seen each other for a long time. Did John Wayne immediately noticed our reflection and asked who he was. Although he immediately knew it was new, the young man was very tired and said it would be better talk after a hot shower. Pointed out her bag and asked the boys that the undone by the time he was ready. Addressing Lee Semin, the soldier said that probably the smell would not disappear even after many washes. At that time, something happened that the kids least expected. Something fell out of the backpack. The image was frightening, but Yugelhun explained that it was the head of an angel with a number system. Although I did not understand how it had ended up in the backpack, our grandfather thought about the fact that after receiving the gold mark, it was possible hunt down and defeat these monsters on their own. After getting out of the shower, John Won asked if anything interesting had happened and found out that someone had decided to bring a gun. Added that someone had said it was necessary for military service, and the boy believed it without knowing if it was true. It looked like the sergeant was not going to laugh the other way around. I was interested in seeing the gun. The young man found it easy to show his sword, and in a few minutes already had it in his hand. The sergeant closely observed the knife, apparently intrigued by her. Chong Woo-in decisively asked the young man for his name. To make sure that the young man understood, the sergeant repeated the question in tone and asked him what his name was. The young man asked Lisa and Min liked his gun, or if I had bought it because I needed some. On hearing that the purchase had given him pleasure, the sergeant noted that if this was the case, then you could use it exclusively from now on. Asked again if our boy had been preparing to become a robber, and if it was true that it had not worked and had ended up in the army. It turned out that this man was not indifferent to the fate of the young man. He said he was tired and wanted to rest. That later would undoubtedly return to this conversation. Jo Giljun saw his new smiling and understood, who was happy to be able to use his own sword, although he immediately added, who had never seen an expression so kindly on the sergeant's face. It seemed that our grandfather had achieved somehow win over this man. However, when he looked company that had worn out the gun, realized that it was the father's company of the sergeant, so he had allowed them to use it. After a while, answering a soldier's question, John admitted that he was not afraid, because if everything is done according to the rules, can escape unharmed. But if a single mistake is made, we'll stand in the corridor. Yu Giljun said once again to our boy that with his beautiful sword, looked like a great warrior. Spent a while, and all the kids were back in the mood. Evening sergeant spoke aloud to Lee Semin, addressing them. A moment later, the young man asked who he was, Brooks, and learned that his system number was 23, and that he was also known as the dog of the earth. The boy added that they have jaws, strong and sharp teeth that attack in herds, so it is quite difficult to deal with them sometimes. Among them is a Brooks warrior whose size and attack power surpass those of a normal Brooks, so some qualify these habitats as two different species. The sergeant asked the boy if he had ever recorded unknown, but he declared proudly that he was just a normal person and that he simply wanted to become a mugger. At that time, the children began to exchange glances, saying to enter his squadron. Lee Semin was a real ace. The sergeant went on to explain that, in addition to having a hard outer armor, Brooks also had a softer part, specifically the stomach. The boss explained immediately that due to the boy's poor eyesight, the stomach was their point blind, but it was necessary to attack quickly. If you failed, the sword would and the warrior could be injured, so everyone would practice their strokes together. Taking his sword, our boy thought, oh, I had not trained for a long time with such a weapon, so he was happy about it. Only a few minutes had passed, and the kids had already started practicing, and it was clear that everyone was doing well. Lisa Emin also wielded her sword as if on a reel. Once again the soldier turned to the young man and told him it was very good, and that he had demonstrated much of what he was capable of, then began to praise the young, saying he was a true genius. Although the young man was a little uncomfortable hearing this, however, the young people did not have time to end your conversation, because at that very moment, an air attack siren sounded, something quite unusual. All of a sudden, someone in charge shouted that an assembly was being called. General, because it had begun to Brooks, and therefore it was necessary to take advantage of the point weaknesses that had been recently discussed. The sergeant also shouted cadets had no right to die, as their families would suffer for their deaths. The next moment, a loud explosion occurred and someone in command shouted that it was time to attack. The explosion was caused for one of the targets set foot in a mina, which made it a little easier to locate the enemy. At the same time, young people, they knew they had to be as careful as possible. First, to make sure that there were no reinforcements nearby, and secondly, to monitor where they were stepping on. Although as for the heroes, everything was simpler, since they were not hiding, and they were already in a large group in the clear, where the boys had gone. For a moment, it seemed as if time had stood still. The sergeant immediately shouted for everyone to take their positions. The young man knew very well what combat was, so it was not going to take long, and told everyone to go on the attack. No one was going to disobey, so our reinforcements along with the rest tried to find out from which side it would be better to attack in order to inflict as much damage as possible. The cadets were as sure as they could and said to themselves, each other, who had to crush those monsters. And back to dinner. The sergeant saw that Liz and Min was not going to hide behind others. However, he was not to advance because he was a rookie, and I just did not know much. But 1 minute later, something happened that no one expected. As one of the opponents touched the young man from behind, the young man would not hesitate. I knew that not only was his life at stake, but also that of the other boys, so he attacked decisively. The sergeant observed everything attentively, but I was not going to intervene, at least not at that time. The young man understood that there were many opponents in that place, and therefore would be enough for everyone to take care of someone. The boys were doing their job in the best possible way, especially after receiving clear instructions. At that time, our grandfather joined his new partner, who immediately began to congratulate him on his strength. Sin embargo, there was no time to give up, so Lisa and Min thought to himself that the battle would be long, since these confrontations had no end. The soldiers fought bravely, although they did not have enough strength to defeat everyone on their own, and a minute later something happened, since the warrior Brookus found himself right in front of one of the commanders. The cadet saw what had happened and watched in horror, realizing that they had to stop. To that boy, when she realized that something was wrong, the teacher began painting. To the young people who stopped standing there and help your partner, no one could understand where this warrior Brookus had come from. It seemed that the young people had calculated everything, but it was not Lisa Ming. Despite having seen many things in his life, observed carefully how events unfolded, and could not move for a moment, was transported to the day when his best friend decided to fight Argentine. Despite not being a robber, Inyi was not afraid of anything. He simply, I knew I had to protect to the people who were with him. This memory gave strength to the young man, so he desperately the grip of his cold weapon. While the soldier said something, the young man was already on his way to the enemies. Without listening to anyone or anything. It turned out that on Tuesday was about to devour the man, that he could not resist because he was on the floor. However, at that time, help arrived in the form of a young man, who immediately began to wield his sword. Lisa and Min thought he had encountered a strong opponent, which was clearly different from the usual witches. The boy understood that he had a conscience. That was good, although it was quite difficult. Get close enough to the monster to try to inflicted harm on him, the young man thought for a moment, and then he realized that he already had a plan of action. The battle began again, but at that time, the boy began to think about what else he could interfere with the poison and stop it. At that time, decided he needed to use more force to prove to the boy that he was not as powerful as I had thought at first. After the coup, Lee Semin realized that he had got inflict at least a small amount of damage, and that was encouraging. The bosses watched everything carefully, and it turned out that they did not understand how this situation had come about, but the young man did not care. The most important thing was that he had succeeded in doing what he had set out to do, and he had done it just to save people. Turning around, our heroes proudly walked away from this terrible beast. The young people who were in the countryside, they also said they did not like those toys, that the only way to stop them was to fight against them. Realizing that the battle not yet finished, the boy decided to let the beast to attack in order to kill them as soon as possible. In the morning, the battle was over, and thanks to him, a large number of Argentines had been eliminated, but it had also been taken out from the wounded. The sergeant first went to Lee Se Min. Although I did not understand what they wanted from him, the young man was stuck in place, not knowing what to expect from this conversation. A moment later, the sergeant praised the young man, saying that he had done everything right, and then asked how it was possible that there had been Lisa and Min assailant test failed. Concentrated indicated that he had written wrongly, which was not good and would cause a great surprise. After that, the young man offered water to his boss. This one saw the reflection, blood-stained, and rejected it. The next day, rumors spread about the young man, talented man who had defeated easily to the shoulders. In the corridor, the boys discussed what they were going to have for breakfast, and one of them described the menu in detail, since it was his turn to make the kitchen. When the young people left, the boy thought about how he would continue training hard to maintain its new status, which was very pleasant. A moment later, John Won approached R and informed him that rumors about his exploits had reached the highest echelon, added that there were rumors that he had destroyed on his own, only to a Brucus warrior. Even if he read Semin, immediately began to feel ashamed. Laying his hand on his subordinate's corpse, the sergeant told him that it was unnecessary because he had actually done something wonderful, then asked the young man to follow him. Only a few minutes passed, and men were already standing in the field with their sword. John Woo and ordered his subordinate to hold the sword with all possible strength. Although I did not understand why, the sergeant looked closely at the young man and asked if he ever had participated in combats. By obtaining a satisfactory answer, a moment later the man left his weapon on the ground to start the competition. 1 minute later, shouted to the cadets to try to block him. Lysaman did not understand nothing because everything went so fast, but his began to tell him what to do. The young man was proud of himself because he did what was asked of him quite quick. Despite this, his opponent did not stop. Looked like it was going to continue, perhaps until frequently injured his subordinate. The young man understood this and also realized that his opponent's speed was simply dizzying. The boy knew that every hit was more powerful than the previous one, and felt as if the sergeant would have been practicing a technique for a long time. John Wayne stopped, noted that it was quite good, and then suggested that the governor began the attack himself. The young man began to talk about the sword. Boss interrupted him, indicating that they were manufactured in the same place, and that the model belonged to a high-end company. Said he was familiar with the model of our. I thought it was a training sword, and that he possessed elegance and a power, and the sergeant noted that cadet had excellent taste and also noted that it reads Min. I could only use this weapon in the future. The boys who were nearby were watching. The sword and the scene between the brother and the sergeant looked really delicious. It was also interesting that I thought I was doing pretty well. What his colleagues felt joy. The kids knew that training could be prolonged for a long time, so they saw no point in standing there and waste time. It was not easy for Lee Sung-min understood that every step under the supervision of his boss was important. A single blow could bring him to the brink of death was a completely different from the one the young man had never faced before. For a moment, remembered the battle in the forest when his partner was Yubi. However, there was no time to think, and the next minute the boy accepted a devastating blow with all his might. John Woo and I did not expect anything like this, and thought he was facing a unique young man capable of extraordinary actions. Some time after the end of the combat, the sergeant praised his subordinate, pointing out that he was capable of doing incredible things. The boss asked the young man if he believed he could become an excellent assailant after his service. Lysaman knew for sure that he had a worthy opponent, so he said the man was incredibly strong and could become an excellent fighter. The sergeant noted that many skills purchased in this same place, and the young man wondered if he would be able to master something similar on the way to the John Wenu site. Said that he had once off volunteer for a mission in order not to terminate your service. No result. 1 minute later, added that his father was embarrassed that he had failed the assailant's exam. Upon hearing his subordinate's question on the situation abroad, the young man stopped a moment and then he said it was hell there. Our grandfather understood that the sergeant found it difficult to talk about it, so he decided not to ask for further details. Man himself himself thought the mission was in North Korea, as they had been informed of threats there, but no further details were provided. Added that if the young man was so interested, I could go there once. The sergeant went on to say that it was obvious, without needing to say, how interesting it was to observe what was happening abroad. Lee Se-min noted, thoughtful, that he just wanted to ask his boss's opinion. A few hours later, began to have interesting things at the guard post. A young man who was nearby began to ask for a receipt, similar to a deer that had been sighted in the vicinity by the young man. Immediately explained that they were real, harmful, with system number 11, characterized by enormous horns that required extreme caution, as their bodies began to rot on contact with each other. The boy, playing Lee Se-min, if he would attempt to continue his career as a robber of the after leaving this place, and upon hearing a mysterious response, said he would probably give up that dream. However, his colleague said he would most likely resign to that dream with a certain in his voice. Cadet pointed out that if the best fail, what can be said about others? Added that he had tried more than once, but it was over here. What it meant, there was more to life than being a mugger. The young man did not like this oppression, so he said that the young man would be successful, and that if I still had nothing to do, could try her luck in the modeling industry. After that, the boys began to illuminate with their flashlights to see what else was going on there. But after a moment, something strange and unusual happened, because the young people thought they saw someone's leg. Cadets did not know who or what he was, so they got a little nervous. The soldier first class immediately turned to Lee Se-min and told him to notify immediately to the squadron about the emergency. The frightened young man said that an unidentified object approached them from the north, probably a young man, but it was impossible to say for sure. The hero, dressed in white robes, was simply standing in the middle of the area restricted, and it turned out that he had been there more than once. Ours wanted to attack immediately. They said they did not have right to cross the territory without special permission and orders. In spite of this, the predator and the young were still approaching more and more with each passing minute. The boys saw that the boy could harm the young man at any time, so they started yelling at him to run away. At that moment, the boy by the arm, and showed no sign of stopping. The kids saw how the terrifying ripped off the unfortunate man's arm. This one stayed there and growled desperately for someone to help him or assist you. Young people who observed, all from its privileged position, thought the man was falling somewhere. In spite of this, they were still unable to do anything, and in addition, they were still unable to do anything. Had never heard from the boy again since then. After a while, people turned to the Abrils and asked if it was true that a new group was being formed for the mission. Yun Shu honestly admitted that he would like to join him. However, the young man, citing the sergeant as an example, said that even he, who was well trained, often returned from missions bruised, and that most of the soldiers were in critical condition. After a brief pause, added that there were also children who did not return, even if the young man stands firm in his decision. The young man said that in the first place, wanted to become stronger, and second only, who really wanted to find out what was going on there. Rising from the table, the man pointed out that since the subject had arisen, Lee Se-min could go see it for himself. That time, one of the cadets knocked on the door and heard that he was being given permission to enter. When I saw that the corporal was busy, the young man apologized and said that in that case would return at another time. However, upon hearing permission from the young people, indicated that they wanted to join the voluntary mission. Young Woo-jae remained silent, apparently not knowing how to respond in such a situation. However, after a moment, asked if the soldiers could actually visit the mission. All of a sudden, the boss again asked in a different tone of voice whether the cadets wanted to join the overall team, and Lee Se-min, in what the sergeant had said, his fellow horde, stated that they too intended to participate in the mission. The man sitting at the table remained silent for a moment, apparently thinking about his response. However, a moment later, boss called R and his partner, who had said their names. Silence once again took hold of the room, and the senior officer stared at the young man, did not rush to announce his decision. However, 1 minute later, put his hand on the soldier's chest and said it was an excellent idea and also a wonderful attitude. The kids were glad to hear this, especially because they were told they were welcome, which meant that the doors of this mission were open to them. After a while, the vehicles of the cadets were driving through the forest in a familiar direction. One of the guys playing R why they had suddenly decided to join this mission. Lee Se-min, I did not know what to say. While Yun Woo-jae thought for a moment, however, it came out immediately that it was time to become a sergeant, and added that if someone beat him up, would be someone outside the army, so he thought it would be fine. Come someone like your sergeant. Immediately went on to say that he had a new recruit, very funny, so I could try my luck in combat with him. The young man hugged the boy to follow him correctly in North Korea, otherwise it would become a sewing machine. On his return, the boy did not understand the joke, but his partner explained that upon his return, it would only serve to surfax socks. It had not been long, and members of the team had already gathered in them, where they heard speeches about how great who were about to join the ranks. The chief announced that his destiny was Kanhan in Pyongyang province Namdo, where the young men would meet with the garrison, and then they would return. That time, the questions about what the kids were doing with the North Koreans and if they met with them team team was informed that it was of classified information. Realizing that there were no more questions, added that they would leave immediately after lunch to see our commander. I need to understand if this man was there, although he did not specify where exactly. Looking somewhere ahead, one of the commanders thought there was something terrifying in this man's eyes, although he did not specify who he was talking about. Sometime after crossing the demilitarized zone, the boys had to walk down a bad road, stayed and dirty. The main reason of this decision was that the Greeks are sensitive to exhaust gases and smoke. Young Woo Jae immediately said that I had told everyone that there was nothing special there, but until now they had not seen anything unusual. Looking around, Lisa and Min said with some apprehension that indeed this place was suspiciously quiet. One of the guys pointed out immediately that if there were no animals in the forest, the reason was obvious, was that there were too many. While there and no animals had a chance to hide. For a moment, our grandfather's friend thought of something and stopped as he watched the mana form on his hands. Thought to himself that for some reason he was beginning to feel nervous, although that was not his own. Taking his brother by the hand of ours, screamed so loudly that the young man was a little scared. Pointing to his leg, the boy pointed out that he felt something strange just below the seam on the ground. That time, something exploded under his feet with such force that all the kids were shot in different directions. The principal commanders, realizing that something was wrong, were immediately told that it was Stath, referred to heroes, pests that were of an unusual species, hit on the ground and then exploded, launching a series of shockwave attacks. The corporal looked carefully in front of him. I was scared, but tried not to prove it so as not to lose control. The young man the boy and yelled at him something, realizing that they could lose him. The man did not want to lose his friend, could fall into the hole that had formed, so he yelled at him to wake up, although he had already regained his senses. Jumping to the ground, Lee Semin said that he was grateful to his mentor, because if it were not for him, he would not be alive anymore. Adopting a defensive stance, Young Wai succeeded his former subordinate if he was ready for battle and if he knew how to defend himself, receiving a satisfactory response. The man explained that when status detects human presence is hidden underground, so it is necessary to hide in the sand and wait for the right moment to attack, was not the most enjoyable activity, but young people understood which was the only way to not only survive but also to destroy the enemy. Despite its apparent simplicity, the task was not easy. The soldiers carried it out to perfection. Only a few minutes passed and the boys had already come out of their ambush, ready to start the battle. Did not understand what was this strange entity that was not actually visible, but he was not going to give up planning fight to the end. By realizing that he himself could defeat the enemy man, ordered our engineer to check how they were doing, his colleagues, and will help them if necessary. Lysaman rushed to help and in the first tree saw a young man grabbing his side, answering questions from the frightened young man. His colleague said that most likely was that our grandfather should not survive the wound. Did not understand if the wound had been caused by the explosion or by the enemy. Continued to reassure his partner, telling him that everything would be fine. A moment later, the young man saw the commander, Kim Kyujin, who seemed to be extracting mana of his opponents, seemed so skilled, professional, and at the same time terrifying that our grandfather could not understand how such a thing was possible. Lee Semin was paralyzed, wanting to ask something but not being able to do it. Practically a few minutes later, the young man was holding a small in his hand. The young man kept staring at his boss, wondering where he had come from, that and what would be inside. After a while, after finishing all the heroes, Kim Kyujin thanked the cadets and added that they had been very brave. The young man said that since they were near the base, the wounded had to return, but that it was necessary to remember that after that, these cadets could no longer join them. At that moment, the sergeant said in a voice high that this place was actually hell, and while one of the boys pointed out that Statham was an unusual former, another added that all this information could be false because the whole forest was full of dangers. Only a few days had passed and the whole group was in the third phase of the mission. In 3 days had fought 3 major and 5 minor battles in which they suddenly suffered heavy losses. Commander raised hand and said that this was the best place to make a stop. Again insisted, in which everyone had to be very careful. The second commander added that in any case should not let their guard down since anything could happen. Many soldiers were angry because they were not given no real explanation and realized that they were only pawns on this serious mission. Lysaman also felt anxious to know where they were and where they were going, so he asked this question, but after receiving a reply, asked no more questions. Looking at his hand, decided that there was no point in wasting time asking unnecessary questions. The sight of the bright glow green, the young man was paralyzed for a moment, hypnotized by such changes, reflected on the fact that for some reason the further north they traveled, stronger became his aura. Our boy was clear to him that something was affecting him, although I could not understand the real reason. A moment later, the boy was paralyzed when he heard some strange and decided that someone was on his way directly to them. Lisa and Mint shouted out loud that some strangers were approaching, convinced that he had reached the right conclusion. Boys who were nearby did not seem to believe it at all, but the young man asked them to come closer because I could sense the presence of several creatures. Grabbing his sword, the young man shouted aloud to their enemies to stop hiding and go out. With every second that passed, the steps became stronger and clearer. A moment later, unknown ones appeared in front of the kid, commented that their southern colleagues were quite energetic, then said that his name was Lee Gil-han and that he was definitely not a hero, so there was no reason to fear him. After that, the commanders began to discuss the fact that the number of suicides side had increased slightly, and in addition had occurred notable changes in their behavior. A moment later, the man asked if he had brought him what he was supposed to bring. Boss had already raised his hand, indicating to his assistant to show them. Our grandfather had seen that little before, but I had no idea what was inside. Once again the commander responded with a glance. I see if young people would check the content of but they replied that no. In that case, the soldier asked what he could do. Piles of cash or gold bars, but Reed Semin commented with indifference that it was better not to think about it since they did not know what was really inside. After that, his colleague pointed out that he had been frightened prematurely when he said that strangers were approaching, and added that people also make mistakes from time to time. Changing the subject, our boy asked him if he was interested, know why they were risking their lives. The man also said that they did not really know it, and that in his experience, sometimes it was better to close your eyes and cover your ears. On second thought, the young man did not know if that was the right decision, since he had always fought for something, but decided not to argue. Although it was night, the youth group continued to advance. In response to Commander Superior on whether all the boys on the team had also returned, said they had all returned, added that he regretted much than the squadron in which he was. Our grandfather, I would have lost so many people, and noted that he hoped their families would be cared for. At that time, the whole group stopped and began to listen to carefully something. When viewing the power indicator, said that it would be best to in that place. On Tuesday he acknowledged that he had already said that the behavior of the heroes had changed, and that there was a whole crowd in front of it, so it would be better to surround them. The man went on to point out that there were too many kinesis in that place, added humorously that if someone did not believe him, could see for himself. There was a moment of silence, and the commander looked at spoke with indifference but with distrust, while the boy stood and smiled. At that time I read Sae Min, and the corporal did not understand why they had stopped so suddenly, for what they felt, a sense of inner anxiety. A moment later, the others began to talk, curious to know what their bosses were saying. The corporal did not understand what kinesis meant, although the young man suggested immediately that they were vegetable herbs, added that they say they look like princesses, and that the heroes remain still, but as soon as they see their prey, the boys pounce on her like lightning. Heard this story, and began to congratulate the young man, saying he was very smart. The boy suddenly turned to the cadet and told him he did not see labels with their names on the uniforms, but they replied that they were not as rich as the South Koreans. In a softer tone, the man added that he would like to meet in person to their southern partners, realizing that he had to give his name or else let go, saying that in reality, it was great that they had met. Yun Se Min waited for the governor to appear and said he saw, in the sense of doing so, as it was their first and last meeting. The young man was not ashamed at all, because he realized something that will be at your fingertips. A moment later, he also saw it and shouted along with his partner. In front of the boys, there were big and beautiful roses. Everyone understood that it was just a costume, and that they were actually boys. The young people who were at the center began shouting high that they had somehow fallen into a trap, Captain the assassin by the neck, and began to insult him with the most indecent names, saying that he had taken them to the wrong place. However, the boy came out mockingly, who seemed to have made a small mistake, and that the Greeks were there, and not a little further away as he had thought. In response to the captain's question about why he had done that, the man calmly stated that I already knew the answer to your question, Corp. By realizing that they could not cope with such a large number of kinesis, immediately began to argue that it would be best to retire. But a minute later there was total chaos, as it turned out that no one knew where to run and where to turn. Looking at his soldier, decided that he was in good shape and that, therefore, he had a chance of winning. However, everything would have worked out fine. But Yellow, I was not going to let the kids just leave, as he told them. The commander had no intention of surrendering, so unsheathed his sword and began to concentrate his mana, realizing that the battle would be immense difficult had not happened long before the battle began. And in this case, there were two opponents dodging a devastating blow. The commander did not understand immediately what was happening. It seemed to him that something like this simply could not be. The reason was that somehow the hero was fighting alongside the demon, or rather with them. But the others did not stand still either, knowing that they had to prove their worth. At that moment Reed Semin began to frantically call Corporal, without understanding where he had gone. As Young Woojai had been by his side for a moment, realized that he could not ignore his partner, because I was practically by his side. One of the soldiers also turned to R. continues, and told him that they could not survive these murderers, and that therefore best decision would be to flee. Battle was extremely difficult, because the captain was not alone in front of the stranger, had to fight so hard against the Argentine as against their enemies. The latter felt extremely safe and invincible, believing that no one could beat him anyway. The commander knew he would not give up, so he acted with the greatest possible persistence. It was not easy for Kim Kyujin shouted while was outside there was a coup d'etat here. However, the enemy laughed and mocked the captain, saying he was stupid and did not understand anything. Kim Kyujin looked closely at her at the same time formed its mana. The hero, I did not think the captain was so strong, so he did not intend to try too hard. But in a moment, the young man was holding things completely in his hand. Humble. That seemed more like an exception to the rule than the rule. The opponent was angry, because I clearly did not expect anything like this. Did not like that combination or the power. For a moment, men went into combat, melee perhaps, realizing that there they could solve something. At that time, the commander shouted at Lee Gil, have not underestimated it, because he was also capable of many things. Then something unexpected happened, because the villain threw his sword at the lieutenant. The young man lay on the ground. Apparently, ability ability to get up or do anything else had very bad appearance, and you would think that the wound would cost you life at that moment. Lauer, that in reality was a hero, got as close to the man as possible. After lying down for a while, the lieutenant put his hands together and got up. He tried to pull the knife out of his chest. 1 minute later, the lieutenant growled as if something had possessed him. Lisa and Min, who watched everything in horror, thought they had a problem and that his boss had lost his mind, so everyone could die suddenly. Turning towards the cave, the young man said he had to continue on his way and asked the others to follow him, realizing that in any case, young people had no choice. Fought desperately against harmful plants, realizing that it was the only way to do something. Looking into the distance, our grandfather decided they had a wonderful opportunity, so he turned to his friend, though the latter was sitting on the floor and did not answer his calls. At that time, it was clear that everything was out of control because the shoulders were getting stronger and stronger, and the soldiers tried with all their might to get away from them. In the midst of all this horror, Liz and Min, I knew for sure that they had to escape, and as soon as possible. However, there was a problem that worried June, so it got stuck in place. The young man continued to wield his sword as his mana became stronger and more powerful. With every minute that passed, wielding his sword, our boy knew perfectly well that he had to save his colleagues and then hide in a safe place. Realizing that he had survived and that he was apparently not seriously injured, the boy turned to him and told him to get up as soon as possible. A moment later, the young man approached him and helped him up, saying that now was not the best time to give up. Read if Min repeatedly assured Kim Kyujin they were much stronger than all these problems and therefore would undoubtedly resist. Also told him that they would tell him to everyone that this place was really hell on earth and that it was better not to come there. That time, the malicious and traitor, the pomegranate ring, declaring that no one would leave there. Just like that, our grandfather observed everything carefully, with eyes paralyzed by genuine horror, but he had no intention of standing idly by. Then something happened that no one expected, as a grenade was thrown, literally 1 m away from them. The only thing he remembers is that a powerful energy explosion threw him, and at the end, to one side, Lizaman lay on the ground and stared in front of him, feeling so weak and powerless. I did not even want to think of anything. Finding the strength within itself, the young man reached for his sword, knowing that no one would let him go anyway. Only a minute had passed, and the young man could already see the enemy in front of him, wondering how it was possible that he was still alive. Taking his sword, continued with an angry voice, adding that Lizaman was actually so hardy. How it could be. Our boy, despite feeling very sick, got up and even planned to counterattack. Then something incredible happened, as a power force struck the villain, and it all happened so fast, who could not understand what was happening. Our grandfather was also confused in addition, could hardly stand, and realized that he was about to fall to the ground in a semi-state. The boy asked Cape if it was okay and added that he could not get up, so he asked for help. The young man wanted someone's hand and went on, saying that they should leave that place and then return to the camp. Losing consciousness, the soldier repeatedly addressed Kim Kyujin, convinced that he was the person in front of him. The man stared at Lee Semin, but remained completely silent. With glassy eyes, the young man fell, and as he had already exhausted all his strength, did everything possible to stay conscious. Although with every second that passed, his eyelids became and realized that without external assistance, could not get up. Approaching our reflection, the boy told him that he had acted cunningly because he wanted to escape, that Southerners had no moral obligation. The sight of the sword rising in someone's hand, the young man repeated himself over and over again that he had to get up and flee somewhere. With difficulty moving the hand, Reed Semin kept thinking about how tired I was and how much he wanted to rest. By looking around, the boy realized that he was in a room unknown, something similar to a hospital. The boy, who had barely woken up, tried to remember where I was and how I had arrived. However, sitting on the bed, he limited himself to watching, to a point because he could not think of nothing sensible to reach his sword. The young man wanted to know if there were other survivors. He also brought his weapon closer and observed everything, mainly because I did not understand anything. The last thing I remembered were the dark eyes of a man who looked at him fixedly. All these thoughts tormented his soul, so that our grandfather told himself that it was better not to remember what had happened along the way. For several minutes, Reed Semin sat there and stared at the wall, as if you find some answers there. But after a moment, the young man, exhausted, back to bed, realizing that even sitting there he found it difficult. Although a moment later, the boy began to hum a song about flesh to ward off his disturbing thoughts. At that time, an old man with gray hair entered in the room and announced that I had to test this young man's breathing. The young man's psyche was visibly shocked, so he suddenly jumped out of bed, pointed his sword at the boy, and told the barbarian to die. However, Red Semin was surprised to discover that there was no one in front of him, nor was anyone else in the room. The young man did not understand anything and thought I was just beginning to see some kind of ghost. Incomprehensible. But what he saw next astounded him, since just behind him, practically over his head, there was an old man levitating. The man explained that he had simply decided to play a joke on him, since the young man pretended to be asleep, and then asked him how he would react to his savior after punching our man in the stomach. The old man began to get angry about the deal neglected that I was receiving, pointing out that it was disrespect, added that judging by all appearances, the young man was a looter, and said he would not hit him again. Upon realizing that Lizaman was wounded, recalled that he was Indian Maestro, legendary that one only in the land of failures, and that she had met the young man by chance. Passing on their knowledge to us, the young man apologized, saying that he simply had not recognized to the Grandmaster and decided to introduce himself to the apocalypse. Shaolin realized that the boy had read reviews of his novels, which was not good. Not yet understanding who that man was, the young man asked again. The old man asked him to give him more details, because I did not understand why Lysaman was giving off such a strong energy, was pure, harmonious and free, as if the young man could become anyone and at the same time does not. This energy extended throughout the universe, and looking at the young man surprised, the old man pointed out one more detail, that it was the energy of chaos. Lee Semin listened to the old man with surprise, without understanding what kind of punishment he was referring to. Also, our grandfather wanted to know what had happened to the other soldiers, with a note of sadness in his voice. Shaolin Apocalypse pointed out that almost all the soldiers of the southern lands had perished, and that the army popular man had immediately withdrawn. Paused to give time the young man to think of his words, then said that the one who had abandoned the young man, as well as the one who had emitted the strange energy, had survived. When the young man spoke to his savior, if I could return, the old man thought he did not know it himself. After a while, climbing a hill, the old man finally revealed his real name, which turned out to be Nohak J. When he heard this man's insidious name, the young man frankly said that he was not from the north, and the man confirmed that this was indeed the case. In response to our asked how it ended up in those places, said he had been there for a short time, simply because I had one thing to do. A moment later, the man offered Lee Semin something to eat, saying he must have been very hungry when they saw that they were going to eat ramen for lunch. The young man was very surprised, without understanding where it had come from, but the old man dies calmly, who had just gone to the store. After a while, the men arrived at a small clearing where there was a stove and several plates of food. The young man, emboldened to see that he does not hakuji if he was going somewhere, he asked the gunman where he was going, and heard that the old man just wanted to go for a walk. Before leaving, asked our grandfather, who would not think of anything but to focus entirely on his recovery, because health was the most important thing at the time. The young man wanted to ask him many more questions, so he yelled something at his new, although he pretended not to pay attention to her. Being completely alone, Reed Semin thought that when he stayed only with their own thoughts, these became even more numerous, both as far as the military and its parents are concerned. The young man understood that his mother and father would surely be concerned, without knowing where I was. But after a while, the young man decided to focus on his health. It was really wonderful. After a few days, there were no significant changes, although the young man believed he had progressed. When unwrapping a package, the young man turned to Nohak J. The young man wanted to know why the old man come to that place, so I understand him again and again, saying that it was quite strange. But Hakye, he only said that if the young man had so much charisma, would show you something, especially because the young man had already made much stronger by the to hear that the old man proposed to him go somewhere before eating. The young man was very angry, as I did not expect that to happen at that time. Sin embargo, no Hakuji was completely indifferent, accelerated the pace and traveled easily several meters, as if they were only a few centimeters. Trying to catch up with the old man, the young man ran after him and shouted to him that if he wanted to, could go anywhere at that time. Realizing that the old man was far away, the young man thought to himself that the old man was not walking, but it was also flying, and therefore it was very difficult to achieve. After a while, the men were sitting on one of the branches, looking into the distance. Finally, Reed Semin saw a building and asked if it was true that it was a base of the People's Army. When he learned that this was how it was, he knew that there was evil there. Our grandfather did not understand how badly he meant, so he decided to ask her directly. After a brief pause, the old man explained that it was true too, but what was important, understand that this was the place of the passageway that led to hell. Leisman continued to remember his mentor's word, thinking and thinking about the passage I was driving to hell without knowing what it meant. Perhaps the old man meant that he could not drink, while the young man thought that place could hardly be called. Seeing the elderly man actively drinking from the flask, the young man asked him for a sip, but he was told he should not even speak. 1 minute later, the man talked about the place again, although he was in no hurry to reveal everything, and only said that the People's Army was carrying out some kind of very dangerous test. The young man found it hard to believe, but he did not. Hagi said it was true, and that they were using enormous power to do so. However, the nuance principal era que South Koreans were no different from them. They did not know what was going on there, but insisted that they had nothing to do with. The young man did not understand what that meant. The old man explained to him that it was a force sinister that should not be there. Men remained silent because heard something that caught their attention. 1 second later, the silhouette of a soldier appeared in front of them, observing them attentively. Although in silence, all of a sudden, this man said he felt something strange, and then asked the old man about our ass, without understanding who he was. The young man did not know who this military man was, but I could clearly feel his aura, realizing that it was exact the same one that had felt in the dark inn. The old man knew this man well, because she addressed him as Park Min Cheol, and told him that he thought he was in a gangkon, although the man thought he had heard otherwise. But Hak Jae calmly thanked him, saying that she was glad I came to meet him. After that, the old man turned to R, called and told him to come over as much as possible to Park Min. Ho pulled out his knife, and at that moment the young man thought that he probably I would have to fight that man. Lisa and Min did not like this idea, despite the fact that his savior told him that he had met a man malicious who pretended to want to help him a little bit. The young man realized that it was just a ploy, because he doubted that the old man could handle that person. Although she had heard that despite her hair, Gray was not so weak, thought to himself that he could clearly feel the strength of this man, and knew he was an excellent teacher. But there was still one thing, was that Minchell was really dangerous and looked like a beast in shape. Human. A moment later, the young man noticed a detractor who pounced on men, saying why they talked so much and did so little. The old man immediately kicked Lisa and Min, telling him to stand back and not get in the way. If someone else had pushed our butt, would have simply fallen on the spot. But the old man's strength was incredible, so the young man flew off directly into the forest. The young man realized that his savior had considerable power, and he was no ordinary person. The young man began to worry about the old man, but I thought this adult. I knew exactly what I was doing. That time a boy appeared before our mirror, and the young man suddenly moves it like a jarga. The young man's hand automatically searched for his sword, but he recalled that he had left it in the clear, where they had been resting. At that time, the beast was approaching more and more, and it looked like it was about to attack. Stuck in place without knowing what to do, since he had no weapons or anything that could help him. Intuitively, the young man began to raise his hand towards his load, although he himself did not understand why he did so. A moment later, the young man petted the predator as if it were its pet, who had been with him for many years. At that time, our grandfather remembered the words about death, or maybe he was telling himself that he did not want to die, or maybe someone had reminded him of it. Lee Semin addressed affectionately to this boy as a friend and suggested they go together. Only a few minutes passed, and the predator was already walking with the young man, as if it had been tamed a long time ago. As you approached the river, the boy knelt on one knee clearly, with the intention of collecting a little water to give the animal a drink. Few minutes later, Red Semin asked the predator if he wanted to eat. Supposing that this was to be the case, he threw a large piece of meat and told him that he could surely eat it, given its huge teeth. And while the animal ate, the young man thought about how did not make much. Its main objective was to pass the assailant's test immediately after completing his military service. However, now the young man was sitting in the forest with a kind of smile, incomprehensible, and waiting for a result even more incomprehensible. The boy closed his eyes clearly, worried about something but could not find out what it was. For a moment, Reed Semin transported to the time when he was just a child. Chubby. It was normal that he spent all day in front of the computer. However, the young man seemed to be watching himself from the outside, now carefully studying his past self. Everything seemed extremely strange, unusual, and painful. It also turned out that the young man from the past somehow, I felt as if I were in the future, although it seemed quite sad, looked more like a zombie than our grandfather. Suddenly, Reed Semin from the past got up with a jump and began to threat to the boy of the present. The young man growled and screamed, looking like an enraged beast. That I was not satisfied with something. However, that time our grandfather returned to the present and saw that the animal began to grunt and show his teeth, about to bite him. Lee Semin did not like any of this, but in spite of this, continued to treat the predator like a baby, thinking I was just expressing his nature. Animal, the young man thought with a certain bitterness that had even fed to this boy a little later, immersing your hands in the pond. The boy thought to himself that animals are like this, and that this predator only temporarily obeyed him, but that instincts always prevail over reason. Once again, Liz and Min's memories took him back. At the time I was on a mission, although a second later, the young man looked at his bright ass and did nothing. Few hours later, Nohagya returned and greeted our grandfather with so much joy and surprise, as if I were an old friend, asking him if everything was going well, although 1 minute later, added that with a magician like him everything had to be of having gone well and that he had defeated easily to your opponent. In response to the young man's question about how there were battle and how he had managed to win, the old man with hair Gree said it had been a sudden draw. The old man addressed our boy by his name, which was already quite strange in itself, and then asked how much time he had left before completing his service. The young man thought with some confusion that he was left with just over a year, and immediately I thought why the old man asked him that. After thinking for a moment, no, Hakuji asked the young man to spend that time with. After a while, the young man thought about how the mantra of the mountain emitted an unusual sound, and because of this, other heroes absorbed the blood they spilled during the battle, which was a source of food for him. Therefore the young man observed attentively to the shoulders, and watched the flowers growing nearby. Lee Semin observed the terrifying boy and the things I was devouring at the time, but not to him but to smaller predators. After a moment of hesitation, the young man decided that it was now his turn to intervene. But for a while longer with the sword behind his chest, boy continued to watch closely what was happening. After finishing all tempers, the young man could finally breathe and take a short break, thinking that he would devote himself to his own affairs. But a few minutes later, discovered several other finds not far from him. By confronting each other, the young man realized that he could finish them in a short time. A few minutes later, R approached the mandarin and asked why it was making so much noise. At that time, the same boy I already knew was again behind Lisa and Min, ordered him to stay where he was. Turning around, boy addressed the defeated predators and told them that the two of them would would have to follow him. Back in the camp, the old man called him, why it had taken so long and why it was so slow. But the young man explained that in reality, it had not taken long, for our grandfather added immediately that, judging by how fast it was going, deteriorating the old man's temperament was difficult for him. But then he stopped because he heard a strange noise. Although he did not pay attention to her, pointing to the pot, the man responded with severity if he had found the mandarin, and knowing that he had completed the task. After that, no Hakuji started asking some strange question. Although the young man did not understand what he was talking about, once again within his voice, the old woman began to scold the young man, asking him if I had not yet understood anything important. The young man did not understand why his savior was so picky with him, especially because they were not in the army. The man did not answer the question. He only said that it was most likely that these findings understood that there was meat there, who realized their destiny, that predators also feel the laws of nature. After a while, had dinner and were ready to train again. Grabbing his sword, the young man asked his savior and mentor to help him with his training that day. The young man knew that by hunting flies was honing his skills through training. Coincidentally, I had spent a whole year like this, although it would be more accurate say that it had simply flown. With each attack, the attacks of Lisa and Min became more serious and professional, so much so that even the old man noticed. And if at the beginning, men were not on an equal footing, at that time the young man, I was doing completely incredible things. A year ago the boy was in the army, and before that he trained in martial arts. But now the old man had a petition for him. This proposal was quite strange. Jack el Mentor wanted the young man to join him and block the gates of hell, but Akj calmly said that his pupil had learned too much while stopping the blows. The young man said that he owed everything to him, as well as to the old man's perseverance and his own. The mentor himself knew that with such abilities, the young man could easily cope with the black mark. A few minutes later, complaining about his appearance, the old man thought it looked like it was going to rain. The man knew that if they did not succeed, close the gates of hell, the evil demons would continue to come out of them, and the world would be on the brink of destruction. Turning to the master, the young man stopped a moment as if I were thinking about something. When I heard that there were only 2 weeks left, the man also thought for a moment, although he did not rush to say anything out loud. However, after a moment, added that time had passed as quickly as possible by stating the day would come when they would sit down to it. Although he did not specify what exactly he was referring to. 2 weeks later, it turned out that everything was still exactly the same, as the boy and his mentor were sleeping peacefully without thinking about anything. However, the young man suddenly opened his eyes and thought that the long day would come tomorrow, because that would be the moment when they would destroy the gate of hell and he could go home. The young man was sure that when he finally returned, probably there would be many journalists who would like to interview him. The young man had even prepared a speech and knew what I would say about how each day went on, into despair. But he did not give up, and it is also difficult situation for their own purposes. And then the boy said he found it hard to believe who had actually become a mugger. For a moment Lisa and Min remained silent, while his memories will take him away. Min Chio presented itself before his eyes, and the young man recalled his first encounter, as well as the terrifying look on that man's face. For some reason it seemed to him, over and over again they were fighting, and the fight was extremely difficult for the boy. Deep breathing, Lisa and Min said the man's name out loud, but I did not want to think about him anymore. The next day on the street, the young man adjusted his boot and tucked his pants inside, then began to wear the jacket as if I were going somewhere. 1 minute later, dressed in his combat equipment, complete and with the sword uncovered, the boy proudly said he was ready to go. At that time, his teacher said that the young man now seemed a real soldier, and when he heard this he reminded our grandfather of a hermit. After that, the man gave his protege a strange but similar to the command from a distance from a car, which confused the young man. Reed Seamean pressed that strange object several times by not obtaining any result, said it probably did not work because I did not hear any sound. Suddenly occurred a loud explosion behind the young man and he smelled burnt. But Hakyao explained to his protege that for the final battle, it was necessary to destroy the place to which they could return. Looking at the fire, the old man said that anyway, they had nothing left to do there, so it was time to get going. A moment later, added that the battle would not wait, so it was better to get started. What they had been preparing for so long. The men sat on a hill and watched carefully the base, thinking about how the enemy's defenses, Lisa and Min, had been strengthened. I believe that words should be given credence. Of the old man, the people's army was conducting investigations on the massive training of assailant using the dark aura. Everyone knew that Pak Minchul was originally an exceptional assailant, but after his experience had become a real hero. Things left as they were. It was very possible that something terrible would happen to man. Looked intently at the young man and told him to follow him, and used the passage of shadows up close and personal. Despite this, the young man did not quite understand how his mentor was going to face alone to such a large number of guards. When I heard that this was not a problem, Reed Seamean immediately began to talk about it in order to be able to prepare. The old man said that the young man was making a fuss over nothing. That time, several soldiers commented that they also wanted to try using the dark aura, as it was an interesting and valuable experience. The next moment, jumping the fence, No Hakjay began to fight skillfully against malicious who did not expect anything like this. For that reason, one of them began to scream they were being attacked and that they had to defend themselves. In a few minutes, all the soldiers became prisoners of war that looked like not having had time, even realizing what was going on. With hands on their backs, this. The old man turned to his protege and told him that they could not waste a minute, so they had to move on. Inside there were soldiers who were dining in silence or discussing lively about some our sanctuary following his savior wanted to walk through this room as quietly as possible so as not to be discovered. Upon hearing the loud laughter of his opponents, the elderly man said that he had heard that today was the birthday of the new leader. The young man in turn said he did not believe that the leader, North Korean, to help him by hinting that at that time, almost everyone was relaxed and calm. At an interesting time our failures found themselves on a large observation platform where the teacher said that this place would be quite appropriate when the boy sits down immediately began to pull out of its bag the mandrake I had bought the day before. Lisa and Min gave the plant to their mentor, even though I did not know what I was going to do with it. For several minutes, Nojake Ye carefully observed the plant by squeezing it. A moment later, the mandrake let out a cry that almost left the men deaf. Our asses immediately covered their ears, realizing that it was simply impossible for a normal and healthy person to could hear it. Despite this, the sound continued to increase in intensity and was so strong that it seemed that even a deaf person in the vicinity could hear it. Setting aside the plant, the old man said that now they would have to act fastest and most questioned possible to achieve its goal. Still sitting on the platform, read the teacher how it happened. Stop that aura if it was so dangerous. Looking at the curtain in front of him, Lizaman said with apprehension that it seemed to him that this negative aura had become much denser than before. The man did not answer the boy's question, but simply asked him to shut up, a moment saying that I was distracting him. That time, the soldiers were discussing the strange sound. Without knowing that it had been produced by the mandrake, they knew that the boys who were waiting for at any time would react to him suddenly. One of the enemies saw our calls and shouted that there had been a recording, but the old man ordered his pupil to jump in time. The villain had already informed that he had cited 2 individuals killed in the western border area and ordered all military personnel available to move there immediately. A moment later the soldier remained silent, with eyes wide open in fear. The young man observed attentively how the huge mirror. I looked at them with tears. Only a few minutes had passed, but the soldiers were already panicking, saying that it was necessary to block the entrances so that no predator could enter. The suspect bent down and yelled at the officers, subordinates, to bring the commander, as everything was getting out of control. Running as far away from the scene as possible, Lee Semin chose his savior, so he probably err on plan that he had managed to carry out. As they approached their destination, the young man announced LY that they had almost arrived. At that time, several enemies appeared before our eyes that, despite the emergency, had stayed to guard the shelter. The elderly man, I knew it made no sense to delay the operation, so I found his trick that allowed him to jump dozens of meters. Thanks to this trick, the old man easily attacked one soldier after another with clear intention of doing something more serious, gaining speed. The savior of our universe thus eliminated one soldier after another, each occupied by the other. A few minutes later, after finishing off all his opponents were on the roof and not Hakuji, the old man turned to our chest. I was studying something carefully on the floor, but remained silent. The young man knew that at that time it was better not to interfere, because the teacher could be in a bad mood, and their answers would not be the most appropriate. Time passed. The old man remained seated, and our Colombians remained silent, although at the same time heard something extremely strange turned out to be the man they had encountered earlier in the forest, and he was very angry. Without saying a word, the malicious immediately began to vigorously attack the young man. In spite of this, Lee Semin was not going to give up. I knew I had come here not only to fight, but also to win. However, suddenly, the boy felt his mentor's powerful hand hitting him in the chest. Our boy understood immediately that this man did not want him to enter in battle, so he took it out of the game. Only a minute had passed, and no Hagyu was already sitting, holding their hands and telling his student to hold on a little longer. Suddenly a bright glow appeared, blue, that enveloped the sand and the surrounding area, covering his face with his hands to protect against bright light. I thought what was going on, and what was that strange old man doing? The man did not like any of this, so he grunted so that the lunatic Lisa Emin will stop doing all of that little by little. I knew he was the only one who could to stand in the way of the enemy, while his savior made what I had to do and what I was already doing. The villain, with anger in his voice, puppy to our grandfather, and told him that he had grown a lot since the last time they were seen. The young man remembered a lot about that time, and his eyes showed sadness and hatred, and confirmed the words of his da. Once again the opponent began to insult his opponent, saying that no matter how hard he tried he would continue to unable to defeat all the warriors of this base. The young man did not want to discuss this issue, so he concentrated his energy on such a point that he threw the soldier in the other direction with the strength of a. The opponent clearly did not expect something like this, because a second later it collided against the wall with such force that multiple cracks appeared. Could recover. The man kept saying that this could not be true, that a soldier could not have so much strength. Catching his sword, the villain said that it was most likely that he would not be dealing with a human being, but in spite of this he was in no hurry to retreat. Lee Semin continued to observe slowly, thinking about his next move. His opponent did the same, yet I just believed he was facing a young man, weaker, who had failed to become a mugger. A moment later, turning towards his opponent, the boy shouted that he had yet finished what he had started. Then began a battle between two opponents, quite strong, each one eager to win. The commander did not like this situation because Lee Semin deftly threw one blow after another, without giving his opponent the opportunity to act. Turned out that our grandfather had accumulated so much strength and energy that he could now fight with incredible tenacity. The young man did not try to end the fight, knew he had to eliminate his opponent, that I was resisting quite well. Man's strength was running out. Despite this, he also did not want to show his weakness. The man stopped for a moment, clearly thinking about his next move, giving that his opponent was as strong as he was. Reed Semin, for your part, said he could not be defeated, who knew of what he was capable of, and would therefore stand firm until the end. An opponent was also sure of it and told him he had to give up because he could not overcome the dark aura. Our grandfather had already confronted him, and then said angrily that the commander was afraid, so much that there was nothing I could do. Lisa and Min attacked suddenly, believing that could still to end this battle in the very near future. At that time, his opponent shouted, I wanted to see how long. Painting the young man who had already flown to one side was a really powerful blow, so much so that the young man was even injured, although I did not expect anything like this. Lying on the floor, our grandfather, I knew I had to get up and continue the fight because the old man was worried about his body and mind, and there was no time to waste. The young man again thought they were in a mortal zone where buildings burned and iron caused havoc everywhere. For to face them, a stronger aura was needed, so that the young man said that life is death and death is life was extremely difficult for the young man, but of course did not want to stop on such a long and exhausting journey. Also, Lisa and Min thought that if you tried to paint, you would die, but if you wanted to die, then you would still be alive, dissipating its aura. The young man knew that he was strong and that with great desire I could do whatever I wanted. After that, gathering their forces, the young man began to recite some kind of spell that scattered no solo su aura, but also their defenses with maximum strength. The villain, I thought I was only counting on facing this pathetic opponent, but he said out loud that whatever happened would still be able to defeat Lee Semin, that had proven to be too resilient. The young man did not want to prove anything to anyone, simply concentrated on his own aura to attack. In a matter of seconds, rivals engaged in a fierce battle. It was hard to say who would win, and the villain was angry because our hero had so much power. In turn responded to him in a sarcastic voice, "Feel like the taste of the ball, the southern land." It was actually a powerful movement because in an instant, the villain's power threw him back. The young man watched his opponent attentively, thinking about your next move. Considering what you read, Min had already done it. That was not the only thing that scared the man. To see the bright ace of light reflected on how the old man had managed to perfect your technique with which he could take down his opponent, among other things. Was surprised to see a huge dragon nearby, grunting so loudly that it looked like it could leave, deaf to all present at any time. The powerful ray of light was so bright that it extended throughout the camp. Seeing what was happening, the malicious began to argue again and again, as if finally would have understood the old man's plan. The villain told someone to send immediately a signal to all. Behind the villain, there was a huge animal that seemed to be their protection. Reliable, but he did not particularly trust him. The reason was that the man somehow absorbed both the energy of the predator that had dissolved in the dark. Looking closely at our reflection, the villain shouted time and time again that they had entered the territory more prohibited, and that therefore they would have no peace, because he would destroy everyone anyway. The man had no intention of surrendering, and although I knew perfectly well that he reads as he meant, was not the reason for what was happening. His greatest wish was still to take revenge on this guy in particular. Running to the command post, one of the soldiers activated a lever. At that time, thick and strange liquid began to spill from behind the boxes, and then something unbelievable began to happen, as it immediately flowed into the sand where the old man was sitting. Gradually this liquid became darker and more viscous, now looking like the blackest aura that could exist. The old man, who had remained seated in his place all that time, observed carefully what was happening, but did not rush to intervene. However, after 1 minute, no Haggai took a small golden object that he himself did not know where to place and put it in front of him. At the same time, positive aura began to concentrate near the splints which the old man had approached. When they first arrived at this place, standing at the center of this energy, the old man began to concentrate it on an object, focusing on its surface. It turned out that with every minute that passed, the savior of art was becoming stronger and more powerful. After a while, the man appeared to be standing on a huge ball of energy with a kind of thread falling from his hands to the center. 1 minute later, the old man remained in his place while the ball got even bigger. Although he was still underneath the old man, the danger was that predators, responding to the signal, began to flock to the place where were located. Lysaman was still standing in front of his opponent, that he was in no hurry to attack. The man did not understand what had happened. Then I understand. At that time, a soldier passing by shouted that they had to leave. Immediately, something started to happen with the monsters flying on the sand. Seemed as if dark energy was absorbing the ball of light. I saw something like this for the first time, so was asked Asu Salvador what was happening to him and if he was feeling well. Looking at his mentor in surprise, the young man, I could not believe que el maestro would have been able to destroy the entire universe by itself. The young man dreamed that someday could have a similar energy in the same high level, even though I did not believe in such a thing. At that time, terrifying demon appeared behind the old man and wanna miss the opportunity to take revenge on their enemy. Lee Semin observed what was happening, but it turned out that there was nothing I could do in this case. Our grandfather carefully observed to the old man that now was it back to them and simply remained silent. It was difficult to understand what the teacher was thinking at the time, but the young man did not rush to ask him from anything. I knew that silence would last forever.
Ya que el maestro
I was focused and watching the sunset. I realized that this was taking too long, so broke the silence, and I understand how it had happened. That the old man, I would have started to live alone in such a strange place. The mentor said it was due to past mistakes, had acted immorally, deceiving the others for their own welfare and for their own glory. At first the young man did not want to hear such things, then realized that this is how absolutely everyone thought, which he said aloud. After a brief pause,
el maestro
acknowledged that there were others and added that, for example, the young man was now completely different from the person it had been a year ago. After considering the short period of time elapsed, the old man admitted that this was indeed the case, as many things had happened during that time. But Fai pointed out that with the arrival of summer, and with summer comes autumn and winter, anyone can change if they want to. Then, with emphasis on his voice, added that there are things in the world that never change. Wanted to know more about what those reasons were, but unfortunately could not remember anything else from their previous conversation.
Sin embargo,
The young man had no doubts about one thing. I was sure, his mentor had become much stronger than before. With every minute that passed, energy dark enveloped more and more the savior of the young man, and it seemed that could hardly surpass, all because the situation was heating up. That is why Lee Semin immediately ran to the location of his teacher and mentor, the adversary of our failure. I knew that the most important thing was to take care of the elderly, so that did everything possible to prevent the young man from coming to his aid. For a moment, the young man stopped, seeing everything that was succeeding behind his back with his corner of the eye. The young man did not want to wait and watch, so he took care of his enemies and turned to his mentor. The eyes of the old man showed a kind of emptiness and sadness. It seemed that he no longer had the strength to fight. However, a moment later, teacher yelled at his pupil to not even think of it. Approach him. Even though the young man was on his way to no hack J, it was not necessary for me to do so. So the old man turned to him once again and ordered him to run, covering his ears with his hands. Our grandfather understood that he could not disobey the master, because I had thought about this one to the smallest detail. For this reason, Lisa and Min did what she had been told all her life, simply ran faster and farther away. With every minute that passed, it was interesting that somehow the young man could clearly see himself in the past, as if it were happening at that very moment. I knew perfectly well that people do not change, and what is more, had met many who had been kind to him. Time and again he remembered how his family and friends wanted him to become a mugger, protect the weak and disadvantaged. Then the images changed quickly, one after another, but the young man did not understand what was happening in that place. For a moment, saw a person who looked like him.
y sin embargo,
Decided to fight against the demon that was behind the old man. Was a terrifying creature, but in spite of this, Reed Semin was not afraid, only an unwavering determination. The young man knew that he had not only been practicing for a whole year, but had to use his own skills, squeezing his sword harder. For a moment, the young man told himself that there was nothing to fear, and the aura seemed to dissolve. And looking around, our grandfather had no idea where he was, for there was nothing but emptiness around it. Leisman wondered where he was, and what should be in that place. Our mirror saw a bright light, but in spite of this, continued to watch closely everything that was happening, as if I were watching something like this for the first time in his life. The boy noticed the silhouette of a strange person I have never seen before, and therefore I did not know who I could be. To the next second, the young man felt as if he was flying into an abyss, and so everything became even more, because Lia Si Min thought he saw a great city. After that, the image changed, and now I observed beautiful nature reminiscent of a jungle. A moment later, lights appeared, and our grandfather remained in a state of prostration, flying somewhere, had the feeling to be somewhere of the base and to rapidly approach planet Earth, even though I knew none of that could be possible. A moment later, the young man saw his mentor, who called him a fool. It really all seemed quite strange, especially because they do not. Hak Ye was somehow mysteriously standing with considerable stability on the ground. Suddenly the man approached his pupil, raised his hand and told him to live. At that time, the young man seemed to him
que su mentor
pushed him with so much strength, who returned, fly somewhere even faster than before. It seemed as if the world had gone crazy, because the young man saw so much to the old man as the weapon he had dropped from his own hands in front of him. The most surprising was the unusual flight among the stars scattered like fines in the sky. But finally everything was over, and now instead of stars, Lisa and Min felt solid ground under their feet. Suddenly the young man found the strength, opened his eyes and realized that indeed was lying on the floor, completely alone. By looking at forward, the young man realized that he was in a forest, attentively observing the starry sky. The boy wanted to say something, but I was shocked that he could not believe what was happening. Also does not. I understood how I could have ended up in that strange place. I did not even know that behind him was a huge and friendly dragon. The young man only understood one thing, was surrounded by a purple mist. That 2 moons appeared in the sky, and to top it off, strange plants were growing everywhere. Finally, for the first time in a long time, the young man smiled and reasoned. Erike was now in a completely different world. It seemed that the dark age was over for him, because 3 years later were developing completely different events. Young Colombian man entered the building of the company SK Art and politely greeted one of the employees. The employee, I did not understand why the young man had arrived so early. The visitor explained that he was in the habit of arriving early. Sighing deeply, Il Moreno said that lately there had been a lot of work. There was not a minute to rest. Progress had gone too far, and that this was a big problem. 1 minute later, the informative session began, during which the speaker said that had been detected signs of a door door in the residential area of Anyang. And while woman was talking about what was happening, the young people discussed on who would get a green mark following month. The red-haired boy was watching his classmates but remained silent, thinking in how the assailants were no longer afraid of the door. Thanks to technological advances, damage rate had been reduced. In addition, it was decided to divide all the assailants into ranks according to your level, so that now all could choose a door depending on your level of preparation. Despite this, it's still impossible to foresee all the nuances that may arise during the battle. There is always the possibility of a title being lost. Suddenly the speaker turned to Han Jae-jong and asked him if he wanted to take over of the next incursion. When I heard that the raids were always directed by the most experienced members, and with more army experience, began to stutter without knowing what to say. At that time, other colleagues indicated that there was nothing to be proud of, despite their experience, as the young man still had a blue mark. Another man stopped the speaker, and I understand why I was not discussing this decision with the others, as if it were something unacceptable. Ryder said he passed the test and would receive a green mark from the following month, so it would not be better to entrust this matter to him. Smiling, the speaker immediately changed the subject and said that in that case Kim Diane would be held responsible. After that, all agreed on a smile. They had no complaints, so it would be left as decided. However, 1 minute later, the Morena whispered to Han Yi-jun that this was wrong because the experience was important, and added that it was necessary to review the evaluation criteria. A few days later, the area that had been the subject of so much discussion was cordoned off, and only the assailants were allowed entry. Kim Dean, sitting in the car, turned to his colleague and asked him if it was true that his name was Han Yun. After hands with the young man, the man showed up again and asked him if he regretted being elected leader when he heard that the redhead thought it was unfair. The man shook his hand again and commented that as of now would have to work together and hope they got along well. Taking a look at the guys in front of them, his partner asked his new what exactly one of them had said about him. Time was running out, so there was no opportunity for long conversations, and in a few minutes, all members of the group met in an area. Spacious Kim Dae addressed someone and asked if there were already any results. The man immediately reported that Yark and Kark were presumably in the gorge, that the level was high, that there were many enemies, and that therefore it was better to avoid buildings. The leader was not at all frightened by this news, claiming that he would easily take care of enemies, and suggested that the boys get going. At that time, the system announced that solo 10 seconds left to open the doors. The young people listened carefully to the report, knowing that a battle them later. At that time, crack appeared in front of them, behind which a subspace began to open up. Everyone knew what it was, so no one felt fear or surprise anymore. Finally, door opened and they had to be on guard, because very often the first few minutes are the most difficult. This time nothing unusual happened either, and the assailants saw a large number of predators in front of them, as they had been told before. The system pointed out that they were pest suspects, had a system number, so that had to deal with these creatures as soon as possible and report the result. Gensher and John, which was closest to the entrance, immediately pointed his gun, giving that he had to act in a preventive manner. A moment later, all assailants, upon hearing the order, they immediately threw themselves into battle, realizing that there were actually many enemies, but that they were all weak. The assailant knew that weakness was not always a bad, because if they caught the unsuspecting enemy would be easily defeated. The redhead did not wait, not a moment, and launched immediately to a battle that promised to be fierce. Only a few minutes had passed, and the young man had already managed to defeat one of the predators, although I understood that this was just the beginning. At that time, another angel ran to the boy, which he also intended to confront. At that time, Kim De-yun also threw herself into the fight, conscious that he was the leader of this team and therefore had to show the best result. Despite this, the assailant objectively did not show much. His colleague had stronger skills and therefore boy could be the commander of this group. Unexpectedly, the system issued a new notification indicating that all members of the team were to prepare for a second attack, as the next group of heroes was approaching. The commander was horrified and told them, "Alos, children," what they had heard to avoid possible losses, and effectively, the next group did not take long to arrive. It seemed that there were even more holes in the door and they looked even more terrifying. The boys faced their opponent. Something unusual happened that made them stop suddenly. Addressing the security group, Han Jae-jong, despite not being the leader, thought what had happened meant fright, began to shout that for some unknown reason, the doors had suddenly grown larger, which was extremely rare and an exception. The young man who had confronted a stranger shouted that it was about of a situation. Predators would begin to spread too quickly. While continuing to contain the attack, the boy asked for immediate reinforcement, otherwise they would not be able to contain the advance and be for a long time. Kim Dae-han had a completely different opinion, did not understand why his colleague was so angry, and also why he was asking for reinforcement. The assailant went on to explain his point of view, saying that when something happens completely uncontrollable, anything can be expected. At that time, the system sent a notification, indicating that the request for reinforcement had been attended to. Once again, the team leader muttered discontent through his teeth that the most important thing was to remain calm, as far as possible. The assailant was also waiting for him to appear, some kind of scary monster in the hallway, whom I could defeat, showing its best result. The young man longed for the adventure, so I missed that extra excitement. But in an instant something happened that no one expected. Kim Jae-yeon faced the leader of monsters, Drake, who I had never seen before. Compared to this one, all the boys who were nearby looked like small and insignificant. Unfortunately, the hunters knew that only the assailant with a gold mark or higher could fight such monsters. After a long training session, at that time, the red-haired boy turned his head wanting to say something but decided to wait. The reason was that his office colleagues, they were supposed to monitor the situation, had already settled in their cars and were about to leave. In a trembling voice, the leader said they could not handle them alone, so it would be best to do the same as everyone else and simply run away. When they saw that the assailants were throwing their swords one after another, Han Yong loudly shouted for their weapons to be collected. Immediately, the young man realized that they had to put up with until the reinforcements arrived. Otherwise, ordinary citizens of the city would perish. The sight of the sinister, the group of assailants did not know what to do to wait. The help, however, the red-haired assailant stated that everyone should stand firm to the end because the lives of innocent people were at stake, and if this dragon went ahead, it would be very difficult to stop it. That time, Predator roared like never before, showing all its strength and power. The assailants had seen many things in their lives, but it seemed that they had never encountered something like this, so they did not know how to react. Suddenly someone turned to Drake and asked him why he had stopped. Suddenly in the middle of the road, the angel riding the beast shouted to the people below. Airless Semen coolly greeted all those present, pointing out that I had not seen them for a long time. Turning to the red-haired boy, our grandfather asked him what year they were in. When I heard that it was now the year 2000, the young man opened his mouth, apparently surprised by this information. While the young man dies, where his youth and golden years had gone, Hans Jae-young thought for himself who were in front of an unusual person. When he heard that, the assailant asked our boy where he came from. The young man noted, who had returned from the world beyond the door, although he did not specify exactly from where. After a while, the boy was already being checked on the computer, and it was discovered that there was no data on the young man. The boys of the company thought that maybe was not registered, and some believed that the young man was from Japan, as he had just spoken in a similar language. A few minutes later, told Lizaman that he was an assailant from another country. I would have to attend in person to the office to verify your identity, but that he would have to be accompanied by someone, pointing to his new. The young man said he wanted to go with him. Enjeon 1 understood this decision, but our failure explained that he felt a very strong spirit in him. Suddenly Reed Seeding shouted that Ato went out at all costs until the reinforcements arrived, otherwise ordinary citizens of the city would perish. But in a minute, added the young man, wanted to be him, who was willing to fight until the end with the assailant who had raised his gun. The redhead bowed his head and said he agreed with that. After a while, the sports car was driving at full speed through the streets of the city when our boy asked him if the car belonged to the assailant this Tuesday, which was too expensive for him with a blue mark, so I had bought it in installment. Lisa and Min realized immediately. The K looked very serious and spoke independently. After a while, the boy explained that I just wanted to, that his girlfriend trusted him and was close to him. Our grandfather immediately began to say that was really laudable, and that buying a car in installments was a great idea. Henry Young was felt uncomfortable to hear those words of a stranger, so he was embarrassed and said he would not say anything else. Lee Min began to justify himself and explained that had been in a place in Ilki, had no one to talk to for too long. He suddenly met people, so he wanted to communicate. Passed little time and the boys were already in the control room among other assailants versus our grandfather. Sat two unknown men watching him closely. At the same time, a young man approached the redhead in the lobby, calmly pointed out that was very possible that this strange young man was telling the truth, which greatly discouraged the assailant. The employee explained that most likely, this young man will find himself in outer space. The door when he heard his name. Lee Semin found it extremely unusual, for no one had addressed him in this way before. 1 minute later, the man reported that according to his fingerprints, a person with that name had passed away like this a long time ago, and even there was a record of an accident that had occurred during the operation. Our boy listened to everything they told him, but it was almost impossible to believe. The young man knew he had to tell the truth, but for now, began to talk about the squadron of immortals. Everyone knew it was information classified, so that only the members of that squadron could meet her. The employee looking at our ass said that a long time ago, there were people among those awake who possessed special skills, but a squadron was formed, special with those who passed the test. The rest of the conversation remained inside the walls of the interrogation room, and every time Semin read he opened his mouth to say something, faces of office employees were filled with a fear in the hallway. One of the employees said that in the first place, they had to listen carefully to the young man's words, as they had a lengthy selection process. Added that during that time, the young man who was not at home could live with the assailant Han Jae-jong. The red-haired boy did not like this idea, so he tried to prevent it by all means, despite the fact that his colleague explained to him that the young man wanted to help his friend Lizaman. Immediately put his acting skills into practice, and explained that everyone would surely abandon him, leaving him alone and forcing him to sleep on the street. Added that they would surely not refuse to host him, since it was a real. I thought I had almost died while carrying out a task of national importance, but he had returned alive. At that time, Hans Jae-jong said that he will undoubtedly would not abandon the young man in distress and would help him, slapping the assailant in the back. His colleague noted that he had been in battle and had shown himself to be in the best possible way. Just 1 hour later, the boys arrived at the apartment where the redhead lived. The owner of the apartment went to immediately to your closet, realizing that the young man would need something to wear. When picking up, the boy did not hear that his guest was asking him to bring him clothes as soon as possible. Our grandfather understood that he was being offered the clothes he was wearing. The assailant, and although I really did not want to wear it, the owner convinced him that he would go to the store and would buy everything they needed. Returning clothes, leopard print interior with Han Jae-ju. The young man asked him if he really liked him, knowing that it was a gift. Through the door, the boy realized that the assailant had given him that article. It was most likely a gift from his ex. After getting out of the shower, our grandfather said that era el best day of his life because he had managed to give himself such a good bath with a towel around the neck. The young man thanked his new everything I was doing for him, and Cheyenne John immediately noticed that the young man finally looked like a human being. Although the boy did not like that deal, our hero never went anywhere without his sword, so in this case left his gun in the nearest corner of the room. Unexpectedly, the owner of the apartment asked him if he needed to call someone, perhaps to their relatives. For a moment, tense silence gripped the room. None of the men dared to say anything. It was clear that Lee Semin was worried about something and therefore did not know how to respond. After thinking for a moment and looking away, the young man said that of course he had to do it. However, when he heard that the young man offered him his phone number, said he would take care of it a little later. After that, Hans Jae-young got up from his seat and said it was time to leave. Immediately added that his new should buy some clothes, although it would also be nice for me to go to the hairdressers. Our grandfather began to apologize again for causing so many problems, although the redhead said that the young man had helped them to destroy the castle, which was a great advantage. Smiling, the young man said that it was true, but still wanted to contribute in some way. Grabbing his new friend, Lee Semin said he needed to buy clothes and shoes, and that he would also like to ask for a zen, but not Korean veal. The young man understood that this was asking too much, so promised to teach martial arts to his friend in return. Once again, our hero to the boy on his arm and told him not to worry, que solo was an emotional person and that he was happy to be back. Had only passed a few hours, and the young man was already sitting in the hairdresser's chair, listening to compliments on how beautiful her hair was. The stylist, I did not understand why the boy wanted that hairstyle. Thought maybe he was a rock musician. Sin embargo, el young man admitted that if Raider's work did not work out, probably join a band. After that, the stylist began to wonder if it was true that Reed Semin and his colleague worked together and received a satisfactory response. The young man answered his questions, saying that was a living person and that he was sometimes afraid of fighting monsters, but the Raiders learned to fight their fears. The hairdresser wanted to give her a good haircut, so we asked the customer about the length and other details, but the young man had full confidence in the stylist. Half an hour later, Li Ming was seen in the mirror, a young man completely different from what had been a couple of years ago, giving him his business card. The girl told him that next time, boy could make an appointment to get a haircut by calling the number on the card. The young man had no money, so he went to in and asked him to pay. By him in an instant, Lisa and Min shot away of the beauty salon like a bullet. The reason was that, for some inexplicable reason, the boy had bought a full subscription, explaining it with his recent victory over Drake. Looking angrily at the boy's back, Han Yi-jong said irritably that if it became so, could do whatever I wanted, pointing out something. The red-haired boy beat his friend. Really, had decided to buy such an eye-catching out. It was strange that Lisa and Min was trying on a jacket with a golden patch depicting a dragon and some khaki pants, as the young man liked, sadly, which was the best outfit I had ever had. Stunned, Han Jae-young asked his friend to choose only one thing. Although he himself did not understand why it was relevant, the young man, even more angry, yelled at him that he must look like a normal boy, not a decked rooster. While walking down the street, our boy was upset because he was only allowed to keep a Lisa jacket, and Min said with resentment that I could not give up all three garments. Upon hearing his new by getting him to go shopping again, only in the future, pointing to a restaurant, the young man suggested going in for a meal, but his partner said he had to go somewhere else. Looking forward, the boy added that he had to paint some. Ryder suggested to his guest to simply purchase a new sword, although the latter began to explain to him that a weapon is the most important thing that has a hunt. Only a few minutes passed and our unknown persons had already arrived at a building. Several employees bowed and greeted the boys. At the service center, our grandfather said he needed repairs. Your weapon as soon as possible. To avoid unnecessary questions, Lee Semin immediately placed his sword over the counter. The administrators carefully examined the sword, thinking for themselves, which was in terrible condition. In addition, this model has been out of print for a long time, so it was unlikely that he could be restored to its proper state. It was strange for young people to see a boy who possessed a sword, though judging by all appearances, had used bladed weapons in many battles. When he heard that he was offered something new and more the young man declined the offer, saying he wanted to repair his sword. Lee Semin noted that he found it difficult to understand this decision, because for him the sword was not just a weapon, but a companion whom he had not been able to care for, but which we will be able to use in the future. A little later, the young man again asked someone to take care of him, of his sword, adding that it was really very important too. The employees looked closely at the young man, earn in front of him, and wondered how they could help him. Understood that it was a young man with old school experience, so they wanted to please him in some way, telling him that they would take care of the work. 1 minute later, added that they would, as much as possible, and that he could return in a week. They did not mention the payment. A few minutes later, the boys got back in the car and left, pointing to his empty hand. The young man said he was not used to being without his sword, giving the impression that he had left it somewhere. His friend said in a sympathetic tone that there was nothing strange about it, since the young man, he has not been separated from his gun for 3 years, pointing to the large and luxurious table. Hanjae and John asked if his friend really wanted to eat pork or perhaps something else. With tears in his voice, the young man said he did not want beef because I had already eaten enough away from home. The boy explained that it was not exact common beef but a certain variety, so it was not very different from the other one. Suddenly Lisa, aminoid, someone was turning to his friend sitting in front of him. It was a young woman who addressed Won Jae-jong, and I understand what he was doing there. Yeah, I was planning to go somewhere to eat something delicious. At that time, the stranger said her name was Kim Yona and that I had heard a lot about our boy, who immediately began to justify himself, explaining that he was grateful to have welcomed him. The young man was sure he was in the way. The girl noted that he had only stopped because he was nearby. When he heard the assailant worrying about his clothes, Kim Jong told her irritably not to bother her. The young man offered at least his coat, but she left the establishment screaming. After bringing the girl back, Hans Jae-young put on his coat and told him that it would be much better this way. The next morning, our grandfather got up quite early, since it was not yet 7:01 a.m. Looked around carefully, as if I were interested in something specific. As he got up from his seat, the young man saw a computer on the table, realized that it was exactly what he did not need. Sitting at the table, the young man realized, okay, many years ago, that I did not visit his forum and did not know if he still had access to it. Lizaman expected to be able to speak with those with whom I had previously communicated or find some information. Imagine his surprise when he saw the system notifications, saying that they were happy to see him, asking him why he had not visited the site for so long, and also pointing out that he was a deserter. In fact, the young man even began to cry. I could not believe I had been able to restart session on the site. Just a few seconds later, our grandfather started on the keyboard. The young man briefly told his story about how he had fallen into a strange dark tunnel and had wandered there alone for a long time. Thanks to his faith, he had managed to get out. Lying in his bed, the owner of the apartment was wondering if he reads. Semin had already woken up. However, when he found the young man sitting in front of his laptop, thought it had scared him again. Although this behavior was typical of him, by watching Lia Se-min, understood what had happened to him and why was it so upset, thinking that the door had greatly affected his psyche. Leaving those moments behind, our boy started training, realizing that this was the most important thing, without which no assailant could be called that. A moment later, the boy went back to his laptop because I had received a message smiling. Our grandfather replied to the owner of the apartment where the knife was and asked him to bring it to him. Hans Yun found it difficult to understand why the young man spoke with a dark scream, but I kept asking for the knife again and again. Suddenly the owner of the apartment began to embrace his guest, tears in the eyes, asking for something he himself had thought clarify any misunderstanding. The boy was not losing his mind, changed the subject and asked him if the assailant had some challenge. Ang Xiong immediately recognized that there were no raids, that there was work to be done because several tasks had accumulated. To hear this from us, said the young man should reconsider urgently their opinion, adding that they had agreed that he would teach her martial arts to the assailant. Running to his new friend, boy began to thank him. When he heard the question about where they trained, after a while, the boys were already in the training room, subway of the assailant, and the young man explained how to use the aura as he had been taught. Lee Se-min gave the boy a notebook and told him that he would undoubtedly would be useful for you. The young man understood, but our failure explained that he had received the notebook of the person who had saved his life. The assailant did not understand why a person I barely knew would give him something so valuable, thinking it was a mistake. Turning his back on his new friend, Lee Se-min said that the boy had also helped him a lot, that it was better not to talk about it. Our grandfather thought he had found a trusted friend and decided that in time he would demand much more from her. The mentor of the arena told the assailant, who first had to test something simple to understand its approximate level. Hyun Ji-young thought it might be dangerous. Teacher calmly told him that even if his ease were hit with all his strength, would not hurt you. Looking at his new, the young man reasoned that this guy had defeated Drake without assistance, so it must have had at least one gold mark. However, when looking at this young man, the assailant suddenly moves. Maybe it was praising too much. When Hans Yun asked him about the defense, the coach replied that he would not need any of that, extending its aura. Our grandfather asked his opponent to start the fight, realizing that they had already delayed that moment. Ryder carefully observed his opponent, waiting and wishing find the young man's weaknesses. A moment later, on Ji-young his spear and pounced on the young man. However, our failure dodged so quickly that neither of them noticed immediately from what had happened. The most interesting thing was that, with each new move made by the assailant. His mentor was moving faster and faster, apparently at a speed that even the wind could envy. Irritated, Han Ji-young did not understand how the young man had achieved dodge it so quickly, and also did not understand why he did not enter combat. Although the battle continued, it looked like it was never going to end, as one was constantly attacking and the other was dodging. Suddenly, Lee Semin said his student moved quite well, which surprised him. However, a moment later, the assailant congratulated our grandfather, saying he was staying strong. When his partner doubted him, the young man began, although as a joke, to demonstrate that it should not be treated in this way. The young man thought I had little aura and simple movement, but his mentor said that the reason was not Laura's size, but the fact that it was being used incorrectly. Angel Jong heard something like this for the first time, so he thought the boy already had his advantage. Raising the hand, the mentor explained that aura and will are the same, and that movement is more integrated with the aura. It is a special connection the best teachers know, and what is more, control perfectly. Added that if an assailant is especially skilled in aura control, then the problem is not their appearance. Fastest emotion is the impulse to kill. So the trainer suggested that the boy attack again, but this time thinking about how he wanted to destroy his opponent. A few minutes later, the order was carried out, and this time something changed in his behavior. Despite this, no matter how many times the young man attacked, Lizaman managed to dodge it over and over again. The student did not want to appear weak and impotent, so he did everything he could. After a while, Han Ji-young fell to the ground. Since I was so tired, who wanted to rest a little more. Our grandfather considered himself a great master, said it was embarrassing to hear about a traitor like this, so he told the young man to get up. Immediately, boy who barely stood up asked the young man, how could I be in such good shape and not even sweat? However, Lisa and Min realized that the reason was not the young man, the fact that he wanted to train as hard as possible. Suddenly several people entered the training room and addressed our grandfather's pupil by his name Ryder, explained that they were his co-workers. They were clearly concerned about something. The young people asked in horror what had happened, as his partner had the day off. The irritated young man stated that it was not his problem, but that of those who had interrupted the class. After that, a strange argument began between Anja and Zhang and the redhead girl. Beauty again scolded the young man sitting on the floor that he still did not understand what had happened. The man behind the employee, I wanted to say something clearly, did not dare to interrupt the discussion. A moment later, the partner decided to show the young man a video in which he appeared, his girlfriend with 2 breasts, while the beautiful explained that these 2 were powerful assailants. Han Jae-young wondered in bewilderment what was so strange about the video. Suddenly something unexpected happened. The colleague began to hit the student of our school, while this tried to dodge one of the assailants. The man said proudly that he had heard of Lisa Imin, and that he admired the young man and what he had done. Extending his hand to the young man, the employee showed up. It turned out that his name was Park John-won, and was a blue-marked assailant in this company. A few seconds later, the assailant added that the girl's name was Young Hyun-jua, and that they were all part of the same team. A moment later, our grandfather received an invitation to lunch. It made him very happy. When I heard that it was snack time, the beauty took a break from her class and asked where they were going. Lying on the floor of the mirror, Han Jae-young could barely stand upright and silently begged them to wait for him, giving our host his business card. The man said he was the director of the company's kitchen, that his name was Yuzin Hyun. All those gathered there began bombarding the young man with questions on how to survive outside the doors and what I saw there. The assailants knew that there were probably many predators there. They did not have no idea how terrifying and powerful they were. The young man thought for a moment and then began to tell them that every day in that place was like a real hell. Boy had to fight against creatures I have never seen before, and with cold and hunger was forced to resist as long as he could. Once, while looking at his reflection in the water, another stranger stealthily approached the young man. Upon learning that our boy did not belong to any company because I was in the army, the director offered him a job. Jo Sang-hyun noted that he was not calling the young man to service immediately, but if I needed a job, could always fight on behalf of his organization. At that time, Lee Semin thought again. By remembering the king of mercenaries, the young man did not want to go into details, for which he declared, I am proud to do my best for this company. The employee shouted that, since the young man had been hired, was to be held an initiation ceremony to make it felt as a member of the organization. Smiling slightly, Lee Semin said that although they were born in different times, now they were all members of the same team. The young people were glad to hear this, so they got up from their seats and began to smile. Lee Semin encouraged the boys and told them that they were now united, and that they should always defend each other. After a while, the events were transferred to the One of the employees began to ask if it was true that the commander Reed's Gilhaf had attacked first during the fight. When our grandfather lost consciousness, when the young man regained consciousness, realized that he was in prison, and it turned out to be true. When asked how he had ended up behind bars, began to lie, saying that he had heard of experiments with people after which he was pushed somewhere, and when he opened his eyes, found itself in another world. Lisa and Min knew perfectly well what to hide, everything that had happened to the old man. Also during this time, the young man had become a kind of psychologist, and by the faces of the people sitting in front of him, understood that they too knew the gates of hell. A few minutes later, men realized that almost all colleagues of the young man had been killed in action, and only Major Kim Kyuchin and Corporal were left alive. Young Wai, the officers did not tell him where they were now. now. Those people were interested in knowing how our grandfather had lived behind the doors. The young man knew he did not have much to tell, because every day he fought and killed, and trusts little in anything else. Despite this, Lisa and Min did not give up or despair. Fought until one day something unexpected happened to him. One day while fighting Drake, discovered that the doors had opened, and the young man somehow managed to return to his world. Saying goodbye to the young man, the men told him that they should check all information. But what if I remembered anything about the rare toys? Should contact them. Upon learning that he is reading Simi had signed a contract, and I could not tell anyone, was horrified to realize that several people had already knew what happened. Smiling, one of the men told him that he should be more careful in the future, otherwise the young man would get in trouble. Added that the young man would be mobilized as soon as he recovered his military documents, and that he was entitled to a medal, but that this would not happen yet. Would also receive a certificate of assailant. No additional testing. As a bonus, although it was only a blue brand, take the promotional exam in 6 months. Hearing this, Leisman immediately asked if he could find out anything. A moment later, asked what the purpose was of the entire fair in which he had participated. However, the young man heard the same thing. That is to say that this task was secret. While walking down the street, the young man said again that it appears that question was closed, although immediately added that everyone can have their secret, and that therefore I did not see the point in knowing more about it. Purchasing a cell phone, our grandfather began to write to his friend that his document had not yet been restored, that his friend's card had helped him. Looking at the phone screen, Lee Semin decided that his friend had been offended, although I did not understand why. A moment later, the young man dialed a number and pressed the call button, although he seemed to find it difficult. At that time, our grandfather remembered being with his parents, who told him he should become a robber to serve others. The young man was tormented by the idea that his parents, they probably thought he was dead, and therefore I did not know how to tell them the truth. For a while, boy stood still thinking about something. In the evening, read Min from the store, but suddenly he was paralyzed. The reason was that our grandfather saw his friend telling someone how they had trained together. The young man was so absorbed in his own conversation that he did not even realize that his mentor was behind him. Although Han Jae-jong repeated over and over again that his friend, although it had no brand name, was definitely stronger than the directors, because he did completely incredible things. 1 minute later, after saying goodbye, the assailant was already staring at his phone. A moment later, saw someone handing him a bottle of soda. Looking at his mentor, the young man replied, surprised when he had managed to approach him without answering the question, or asked his colleague why he had decided to suddenly become a robber. After a sip, Han Jae-young honestly admitted that he needed work somewhere and also make a living, but Lisa and Min, speaking for himself, explained that once wanted to live up to his own name. After that, the boy asked him if the assailant loved his girlfriend, and upon hearing a mysterious response, immediately the young man asked him a question in turn about what the young man would say. I found out that she was seeing other people behind his back. With tears in his voice, the boy explained that he himself knew that this was the case, that the beauty only dated him because he was a mugger, then said that she had had a difficult child, so I had always dreamed of something like this, and therefore could not be blamed for it. Lisa and Min did not want to continue with this conversation, because he did not understand his friend, so he told her that the next day he was waiting for them. Special training. The frightened assailant did not understand what that meant, so he started to worry about some brand. To hear that these things should be completely forgotten, because they meant nothing. 1 day later, as they had agreed, the boys got together again in the training room to pass to the next level. Our hero began to gather mana in his hands, even though he did not tell his protege what he was going to do by transferring mana to his student. Thought it was a completely normal state in which Laura's total volume was residual, but efficiency was too low and the circulation was not entirely fluid. Frightened Han Ji-hyun again did not understand what to do. The young man told him not to be afraid and to simply follow it. Realizing that something was wrong, the assailant asked if it was true that it was a technique. Obscure, the mentor, said that this should not be viewed in a negative way. The most important thing was harmony and balance, clarity and turbidity, all of which was part of the world. If you only control one type of aura, you soon run the risk of losing your balance. A few minutes later, Lisa and Min added that the young man should not stop and should continue training, although he did not say it was time to get to work. A few minutes later, our grandfather went to the director of the company to receive any type of order. In answer to this man's question on the assailant, the young man explained that he had graduated in a well-known school and that he was an excellent student among graduates, and while the man was looking at some documents, the young man confirmed once again that this was absolutely right. San-hyun gave a map to Lia Si-min and explained that a door would be opened at the site marked where monsters called monkeys would appear, were a subspecies, but instead of fur, had scales and strength enough to tear a person's arms off instantly, were very, and could easily break through a fence and escape. The director, upon hearing that the young man had agreed, said that compared to the level of difficulty, the reward was quite low. So many people refused. Sin embargo, the young man shouted that if it was about saving lives, what could be wrong, and added that the others, they simply had the wrong attitude. After a while, a car was already speeding down the road with the intention of parking next to the library. When the car stopped, our grandfather's leg peeked out of him. The young man was full of sadness and energy, so he greeted to all the kids gathered there, said he represented Thetian Department of Mirrors, who was a monster hunter and crystal creator. Then gave his name and said he expected to working with them. All present looked at each other with disbelief, unable unable to believe that this was the case as a robber. Although there should have been no doubt about it, the red-haired girl watching the boy thought a strange hunter had arrived. A few minutes later, began a briefing about the special operation, during which began to talk about the enemies that they would have to face. And while all the assailants listened to the speaker, our grandfather closed his eyes and fell into a trance because he found it extremely boring. Listen to all that. When I heard that there was still half an hour to open the doors, Lee Semin thought it would not be soon, and holding his sword, the assailant who was beside him reasoned that as soon as the doors were open would do their job. She said that thanks to her sword would do everything possible to prevent predators from break the court. Our grandfather, observing the girl's monotonous activity, began to yawn because in reality I was bored. That time, the beauty said that there was only half an hour to open the doors and asked the young man if he was going to wear protective equipment. However, calmly in his voice, he thought he had none of that, which surprised the girl by smiling. Honestly admitted that he never wore any of it because the protective equipment was simply in his way. The beauty thought for herself, I was dealing with some kind of loser, but he spoke out loud how it was possible to work as a robber without protective equipment. Upon hearing this, the boy stated with enthusiasm that she should not have cared about him because it was fine. Not to disappoint the beautiful redhead, Lisa and Min explained that she would try first, but that if he felt danger, would immediately leave the site. Added that if the assailant sighed with so much sadness, each time would fail. When I heard that there were only few seconds before the doors opened, our grandfather thought about how to end up quickly with these reinforcements. The assailant, who stood by his side and watched his face, asked him to concentrate on them and on himself as a true professional. Suddenly, the system announced that the doors had opened and that all hunters should be prepared. A moment later, the boys watched the predators. Clearly did not like this situation. The young men fearfully their weapons, ready to enter combat at any time. In a matter of seconds, many of the assailants were already fighting desperately against predators. It seemed that these people, they did not care who wanted to attack. Suddenly one of the monkeys rushed forward, leaving hunters behind. The assailant shouted at her colleagues that one of the heroes had jumped, so he wanted to go back and take care of him. Turned out that this enemy had a dizzying speed, since it was running so fast that it was difficult to track of him. Our grandfather, that I was a little behind the group, had already noticed the presence of this unknown and knew where he was headed. The young man knew he had to act decisively, as it had done all these years. Grabbing his sword, the young man thought to himself that if he did not destroy his enemy would destroy him. And so in an instant, Lee Semin rushed towards the enemy that ran directly towards them. The young man thought to himself that he had finally become friends with a fear, and that something new had come to his aid was the indifference of a butcher. When I had to kill those who wanted to live, the rookie assailant, as many considered, faced the Greeks so quickly that others could not believe it was possible. The red-haired girl thought with horror that this young man definitely did not have a blue mark because he was stronger than all of them combined. It had not been long. Battle was already over, and the kids congratulated each other for a job well done. Suddenly, the assailant approached our corpse and asked him, upon hearing the young man's sarcastic comment, that he had not yet come up with an autograph. The beauty said she understood what she meant, but added, who knew very well that the boy was very talented, that in spite of this, had to follow strict rules. Upon hearing Lee Se-min talk about the equipment, the beauty said it was not about him, but of the record label, and that there was no need to pretend be better than others, making others look silly. The young man, showing his blue insignia, said that he had not actually fooled anyone, as it was his first time in a raid. Our grandfather's companion looked curiously at his identification, trying to understand what it was all about. Stuttering, apologized for yelling at the boy, and said that his skills were not really like those in a blue badge. Still smiling, our grandfather said he could imagine how surprised the assailant was, and added that without realizing it, she had become his admirer.